If you want your quadcopter to fly as good as it possibly can, if you're having some kind of a problem with the way your quadcopter flies, like bounce back or instability or hot motors, all of these problems can be solved with PID tuning. And there's a lot of PID tuning tutorials out there on the internet, and some of them are even pretty good. Some of them are even by this guy. But PID tuning is, in a lot of ways, a mystery. There's a lot of advice about what to do. It maybe isn't quite backed up by anything other than feels. What we're gonna do today is I'm gonna get together with Mr. Brian White, who is, I think, like the authority on quadcopter PID tuning in, dare I say the world? You'd probably be a little more humble about it.
A little more modest about it than that, but.
Certainly up there.
Yeah.
Brian White, the inventor of the software program PIDToolBox, which is specifically designed to analyze black box logs and help you make your PID tune better. And we're gonna go through the process of PID tuning this quadcopter. Here's the thing, Brian. I've seen you do PID tuning tutorials on other channels, and I've seen the content you put out on your channel, and it's all good, but I've always wished that I could have the opportunity to like Bardwellize it. By which I mean, try to put it in an order and a structure that I understand. Mm-hmm. And then hopefully an order and a structure that you guys can understand too. I don't know, we're gonna find out. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're gonna learn something today. Brian, for the people who don't know you, like, how would you describe yourself?
Well, I work at a university up in Ontario, Canada. And so most of what I do at the university is data analysis. So I've been doing data analysis for quite a while. And I'm the developer of PIDToolBox. So I guess it was about 6 or 7 years ago I started developing that, and to its current state today, it's been lots of development over those years. Also, I established a company about 2 years ago called PTB Labs. You can find me on ptblabs.ca. And I have a consulting business where I help clients from around the world tune drones from the size of a 2-inch to a 5-inch to...
What's the biggest you've tuned? 40 inches? Yeah. There's a lot of people out there who are sort of experts on PID tuning in a lot of different ways. But I think one of the things that excites me about this video is that you have this huge wealth of experience tuning actual drones in real life. Because that's your side hustle. Your day job is at the university, and your side hustle is helping people tune drones. So like a lot of people have like a theoretical approach to PID tuning, but maybe they've tuned 5 or 10 drones. Maybe they've tuned as many as 20. How many drones total would you say you've PID tuned?
I think roughly to date, upwards of over 1,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And most of those are larger than a 7-inch.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the city lifter community in particular, I've done a lot of work in, yeah.
Now, one of the things we're not going to talk about in this video is what is a PID, feed forward, what is a PID controller? And it's not that that stuff isn't important, but 2 things. Number 1, hopefully we're going to give you a procedure that you can follow and say, look, do this, and then look at the result, and if you see this, then do that, without necessarily having a deep understanding of like what is a P, an I, and a D. However, that understanding will help. Like, it's good to know that stuff. I've got a video that I made. It is about an hour long, so strap in. And it's going to be linked in the video description below. And it talks about what is a PID controller. It's got actually an app I made. I vibe coded an app with AI to like demonstrate what a PID controller does. And I specifically designed it to look like what you're going to see when we're using PIDToolBox and Blackbox. So if you're interested in that deeper understanding, then you can go watch that video. And if you want to pause this video now and go watch that one, so you come into this with that deeper understanding. But we're going to dive in without necessarily going into all that background, because then this would be just a ridiculously long video and it wouldn't be focused on the PID tuning process, and that's where we want to be. Before we get into like the Betaflight and the PIDToolBox, is there anything like that we should do just to make sure the drone is kind of like good to go? I mean, obviously we hover tested this morning.
Well, make sure everything is tight. Make sure the screws are tight.
Okay.
These are sort of obvious things for me, but it might not be. It's not trivial. So you want to make sure your props are on tight enough. You want to make sure, look around for any screws that are loose on the frame.
Flight controller is secure. You got a capacitor. Your props. Do you want to do it with fresh, brand new props?
I think it's a good idea. So there's an interesting misconception there too, where some people say, well, I like to tune with bad props. Mm-hmm. But the problem with that is then when you generate, the noise you generate from those bad props, you won't really understand how to, like you might be overcompensating for something in the filtering and stuff.
Yeah, you want to get a clean baseline.
Yeah.
And then like theoretically, if you were to PID tune to the absolute nth degree, the 99th percentile, I like to say that makes a fragile PID tune. Whereas if anything changes, if you crack an arm slightly or if your prop is slightly bent, then your PID tune is it can't fly. But in the beginning, we're going to start with clean props, good clean mechanical build, because we don't want anything thrown off our numbers. And then like we're probably not going to tune to like the 99th degree anyway. So if the props get a little bent up, that's going to be fine. Okay. So we've got that. We're good to go there. What's the next step?
So the next step would be to plug into Betaflight, and let's work our way down through a couple of the main tabs.
Because we need to set Betaflight up in such a way that we can do this PID tuning correctly.
That's right. That's right.
So we've got Betaflight here. We've got a basic flying drone. What changes do we need to make to the Betaflight configuration to prepare for your PID tuning process?
Okay, so what I always do from the beginning is start here in the configuration tab. Just make sure that your CPU load is reasonable.
Okay. So what's reasonable? Less than?
I would say less than 50%.
Okay.
I try to aim for that. And usually what you would do, so in this case, you're running this is a BMI gyro. That's why your maximum PID loop rate and gyro rate is 3.2 kilohertz.
Right.
So in that case, you should be fine. But sometimes on an
like an F4?
F4 and even an F7 actually. You might want to go 8K, 4K.
Right. So if you've got a CPU load of over about 50%, then it's recommended to take, if you've got an 8K gyro update, you'll go from 8K 8K down to 8K 4K. In this case, we're fine.
You don't have a problem because the max is 3.2 and you rarely have an issue there.
So no problem with our CPU load. You should never have to go below 8K 4K on most modern flight controllers.
Never.
Okay, so we're good to go there?
Good to go there. So the next thing I would do is I would come on down to the presets. So one of the first things you're going to want to do is set up your proper RC link preset. Now what is that? Well, your radio has a certain, if you're running ELRS or Crossfire, they're going to be set at various, they have various
packet
possibilities
rates.
for packet
250 hertz. We're using 250 hertz.
Right.
Crossfire does 50 or 150.
Right.
Express LRS has various for all the way from 50 up to 1,000. So we're using 250.
Right. So you're just going to go into your presets there. You can select the drop down so you only see your RC link presets. You just click that. And then we're in ELRS, so I just like to shorten the number of options here. ELRS.
Hang on.
Sorry,
ELRS.
And then we see our options. So if you're running 250 ELRS, you just basically click that.
So I see here that we've got 150 hertz, 250 hertz, etc. There are a couple of Express LRS packet rates that I don't see here. Like I know Express LRS can do 200 hertz, and then there's 333 is another one. If I don't see my packet rate here, is it better to go low or to go high?
Well, I think I would try to pick the one that's closest in general. But if so you're saying 220 hertz?
What if I was at like 200 hertz?
So if you're at 200 hertz, I'd probably pick the 250.
Yeah, 250.
Yeah.
And then just for the sake, I mean, it would probably just be better to just set it to one of these packet rates.
Yeah.
Like if you absolutely need 333 hertz, then I probably would
probably go with 500.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we're going to load the RC Link preset. Boonk.
So here's where you have a few
review
more
the list of options.
Exactly.
The flight style, that is the smoothing, and is that going to affect our PID tune, or is that just going to affect the stick feel?
Yeah, it's not going to affect our PID tune, but it's certainly going to add some latency to your experience.
Yeah,
for sure.
So I always pick freestyle.
Okay.
What that is, that's not really relevant to the PID tune, so we're just going to skim over that in the interest of time. Yeah. And then we don't need to worry, the UART, it's UART2, but I don't even know why we need to do that. Yeah. And then we're going to pick, and then we're going to save and reboot.
The next thing I would do is I would go down to the motors tab, make sure that you have bidirectional DSHOT turned on. Okay. Now, this is something you already did because you did a steady hover, you kind of knew what was going on there. So, but a lot of times this is not on by default.
Yeah, so we need that just because it makes your drone fly gooder.
Gooder, yeah.
And also the bidirectional DSHOT is going to give us telemetry information from the ESC that we're going to use during our PID tuning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So you definitely need to be doing that. Okay?
And then we're going to come on down to the Blackbox tab. And then what you're going to do here is, ideally, you want to be using onboard flash if you have it.
Okay, so flight controllers can have an onboard data flash chip or an SD card. Either one is usable. Why is onboard flash superior?
Onboard flash tends to not give you these occasional breaks in the logging. So some SD cards have a problem, and whereby you're recording and all of a sudden you get a break in the log, it stops for a little bit, then it kicks back in. And the problem with that is it can mess up the spectral analysis. It messes up the result of the step response as well. Yeah. So if you get some really weird results with step response, you're like, what could be going on here? Look for those errors if you're using an SD card. Now, ideally, what I always recommend is try to avoid flight controllers that don't have onboard flash if you're interested in doing PID tuning, really.
It is possible to do this with a good quality, fast SD card. It's not a deal breaker. And frankly, you're probably not going to go, oh, well, I guess I'll just buy a different flight controller and throw out my flight controller. So if you have an SD card, that's not a showstopper. The advantage of the SD card is that this data flash chip can record for maybe 2 to 4 minutes, maybe a little more, and then it's full. Whereas an SD card, you could just keep flying all day, keep all your SD card, all your logs, and so there is an advantage there. You do need to have Blackbox working. Now, if your flight controller supports it, then you'll come here and it'll say onboard flash or whatever, and it'll be working. If you don't have Blackbox or for some reason it's not working, then you're not going to be able to do the things we're going to do today. And then you're going to make some changes to this configuration.
So the first thing we're going to want to look at is the logging rate. So how high should we set this logging rate? So you see with the BMI gyro, we have options 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200. If you're flying something the size of a 7-inch, you don't really need a super high logging rate because the motor vibration and the vibration that this drone is going to produce is not going to go much above about 800 or 1,000 hertz or so.
What you're getting at there is a principle whereby the maximum frequency that you can record is 1/2 your logging rate because of something called the Nyquist limit. Thank you. Going back to my computer science degree. So essentially, these are slower spinning motors. So the fastest, highest frequency they're going to make is lower, and so we don't need as fast of a logging rate. The rule of thumb that I've always used is I want to be logging at least 2 kilohertz, which gives me up to 1 kilohertz frequencies, and even for a 5-inch drone, that's plenty. Would you ever think you'd need to go above 2 kilohertz logging rate?
For something smaller like a 3-inch sometimes.
Maybe.
Yeah, the third motor harmonic of a little 3-inch can go way above 1,000.
So you'd want to go up to maybe a 4 kilohertz logging rate.
So sometimes that's a pain because at 4 kilohertz you're going to use up that flash really fast. So what I would typically do with a smaller drone is I would run 4 kilohertz for the first couple of tests to look at the noise and the issues that might be happening above 1,000 hertz. If you don't see any issues, then I drop it down.
Oh, that's interesting because for the filter tuning, we need to see all of the motor noise, but then once we get to the actual PID tuning, we don't actually need that higher frequency stuff. We could turn the logging rate down. That's very interesting. So we're going to set this to 1 of 1, which we want to be at least 2 kilohertz, right?
Well, I actually think 1/2 is fine in this case. But
because this is a 7-inch.
Because it's a 7-inch, But it's not. There's nothing wrong with trying 1 of 1 as well.
It's just going to fill up our storage faster.
That's all. So let's do that for now, so that we get the full. So this will allow us to see half that rate because of the Nyquist limit. So we'll be able to see up to 1,600 hertz.
Oh, that's plenty. I kind of agree with you. That's excessive, but sure. Let's see how fast it fills up.
And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look here at the Blackbox debug mode. So traditionally, we used to have to put into that debug mode something called gyro_scaled. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
But that was pre-Betaflight 4.5. But what you'll notice is that, so what that did is that put the pre-filtered gyro into the debug variable because it wasn't automatically recorded in old Betaflight. And so, but what Betaflight has done since is added a few different, parameters that are always recorded. So one of those is the unfiltered gyro. Another one is RPM. So it didn't used to record RPM automatically. So we get all that stuff now recorded by default. So one thing we're going to do though, so now that we don't need gyro scaled into debug, is there any other use for the debug?
All right.
So
I just feel like you're going to tell me there is.
That's right. So what I did with PIDToolBox is last couple of versions, I introduced the ability to use it to look at the dynamic notch information.
Okay.
And so what we do is we put in the debug something called FFT_FREQ. And what that debug does is it puts into the debug, what that setting does is it puts into the debug variable the dynamic notch information.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So
then we're just going to hit save and reboot.
So if we have a Dataflash chip, you can see it's full. Use space 32 meg. It's full up, and we are going to hit erase flash, and we're going to erase it. And then as soon as we start flying, it's going to start recording again, and we'll see how fast it fills up, but it'll fill up relatively fast. The other thing you're going to need to do in order to follow this particular PID tuning process is download and install PIDToolBox. In order to get PIDToolBox, you have to go to Brian's Patreon and download it. And there are going to be people who say, I don't want to buy a piece of software in order to do this. And to those people, like, well, you're going to have to follow a different tutorial, unfortunately. Because like this is your, you put a lot of work into this.
The upside, it's only $4 US dollars.
$4,
so it's the price
guys.
of a coffee.
Yeah. And if you don't want to do that, that's cool. We respect that. But sign up for his Patreon for 1 month, download PIDToolBox, unsub. It's up to you. But we're going to need PIDToolBox. You can get it from this page. There's a link in the video description as well. We're going to download and install that. And then what are we going to do?
Then we're going to do our steady hover.
Okay.
Okay, so you're basically going to arm the copter. Now you can do this in angle or acro mode. It's your choice. We're just going to do a steady hover. So what that means, you're going to arm, bring it up about 3 or 4 feet off the ground. You want to make sure you're not too close to the ground. And then you're just going to.
Why do I want to make sure I'm not too close to the ground?
Because you're going to get a lot of turbulent air from the air blowing off of the ground, and that's going to affect the output of the spectrum. So you just hold it like that for about 30, 40 seconds or so.
Okay. I've got my fly min in the lower right, so I can easily. I'm just hovering. And what's the purpose of this test? Because like I'm clearly not doing anything to the PID loop, right? I'm just hovering. Yeah,
so we just want to evaluate the baseline noise level, because sometimes you can get really, electrical noise can really elevate the spectrum. And we're going to see that even with a steady hover. And what's really nice about a steady hover is everybody in the world is going to do it the exact same way, roughly.
Gotcha.
And it's going to be replicatable. So you can do it again and again. You'll always get the same result. Okay. And so we're going to, when we look at the spectrum, we're going to see what we expect to see is a real stereotypical pattern. And if we see the baseline is too elevated, we're going to know that there's something odd going on with electrical issues.
Okay. All right. So the next thing we got to do is we got to get this Blackbox log off of the drone. If it's an SD card, well, you can just pull the SD card out, although with some flight controllers, that's a little bit of a hassle. Then Betaflight also has the ability to mount the SD card or the Dataflash chip as they call it mass storage mode. It's a removable drive, and that is the official way to do it. I also noticed that we used about half-ish, a little less than half of our Dataflash storage on just that little 1 minute flight.
So you're going to be clearing off the black box quite a bit. That's pretty typical, which is not a bad thing too, because when you have just like a bunch of sublog files, and sometimes it gets confusing which one is which.
Like which test was which.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah. So we'll do activate mass storage mode. That's going to be the same whether you have Dataflash or an SD card. And
so
when we do that,
for
a drive should pop up. Here it is, Betaflight. With a Dataflash, it's slow as shit. Yeah, I've run into this. Before.
Okay, so if this happens,
well, with a SD card, you just take the SD card out.
Yeah.
And then with the Dataflash, you do the old way, which they say you're not supposed to do.
Oh, it's fine.
But so you do save flash to file.
Yeah. You should come up with your own nomenclature for how to name log files.
So I should have named that like 01-hover test.
I would call it just hover test. Something simple.
I number everything. I always number it.
You number it? Okay.
Well, so they stay in order.
Yeah, good point.
Chronological order.
Yeah.
Because I don't always trust the date stamp.
Fair enough, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, that makes sense. I'll rename that.
But it's also, I find like really excessively long names not that helpful. Because in PIDToolBox, the name itself becomes the legend. So the shorter it is, the better too, right, in that sense. That's another reason why when you have multiple sub-log files in there, it doesn't know what they are, right? But when you have just a single log file, you can name it, and that name becomes the legend.
Save complete. So then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to erase it. I guess
I would wait until you make sure that you actually have it and it loads in. And
so then I'm going to go ahead and rename this 01 hover test. Okay, where do we start?
All right, the first thing we're going to do is go up here to the little green button called Open File. I'm going to click on that, and we're going to navigate to our file. Yep, and then we're just going to select that and hit Open.
We've got two log files in this one, two flights in this log file. So we need one of them is 1.3 seconds. Oh, that was just my little test arm.
Exactly.
Okay, so the longer one is clearly the flight.
Right. So maybe the first thing we want to do is probably trim the files. So you notice these gray regions here?
Yeah.
So by default, PIDToolBox will not look at the first second of data and the last second of data. Oh, and that's like, assuming that like you arm and it's going to be sitting on the ground. So you don't want to be looking at that data in the
and then you land and it hits the ground and it bounces and that throws the data off.
That's right.
That makes sense.
Right. So what we do is we simply click the I key, and then we're going to just bring the slider to the start point that we want. So we just want to go
I for in point.
I for in. And we just want to go to the point where the throttle is roughly holding steady here, right?
Yeah, okay.
And then the out point is fine here because it looks like the logging stopped just before you.
Out point be O.
Yeah.
And then I'd adjust the out point.
Exactly.
Yeah, I anticipated this.
Let's do it.
I disarmed right before I hit the ground.
Yeah, right. And so then we're going to hit these. Let's just go through the process. Yep. And then we'll click the O key. Just one time, that's all you have to do, and then just drag it to where you want to end the file, right there, okay?
Okay.
And that grays out, these regions that are grayed out, none of that data is going to be in the analysis.
Great.
Okay? So then the first thing we're going to do, we're going to head on over to this spectral analyzer. So you're just going to click that button. And I think what we should do in the beginning is just plot the pre-filtered gyro. So what's called here the gyro pre-filt over here, okay? And we're just going to hit run. So what you're looking at here is roll, pitch, and yaw, and this is the spectral output of the pre-filtered gyro.
So let me try to parse that for the viewers. Spectral output. Sorry, viewers, if you already knew what he was talking about, don't mean to insult your intelligence. Spectral output means we're looking at the magnitude of vibration at a given frequency. So we can see here that at around 160 hertz, thank you for moving the mouse, they can't see where I'm pointing, appreciate that. About 160 hertz, we have a big peak. There was a lot of energy at 160 hertz, a lot of vibration at that frequency, whereas when we get up above about 500, 600 hertz, there's very little energy at those higher frequencies. The pre-filtered gyro means we're looking at the actual gyro data before Betaflight gets its dirty little hands on it and starts filtering
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in a sense, this is the representation of the vibration around this frame when we've done nothing to it, right? Okay.
And then we've got a focus here on the sub 100 hertz because those lower frequencies can be particularly problematic.
Yeah. So in these lower frequencies, so sometimes it's useful to parse this frequency range up. So we can think of the 0 to 20 hertz range around that point as the commanded frequency. So that's the kind of stuff we're interested in.
Right.
So had you moved the drone around a lot, this energy here would go way up really high.
Right. When we see a peak see, a lot of times we're very concerned with filtering out noise.
Yeah.
But when we see that peak of noise below about 20 hertz, that's the actual movement of the quadcopter that has to be there or you wouldn't be able to fly.
That's right.
And then any other peaks we might be interested in.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and don't be concerned. This is essentially just a zoomed in portion of this little bit right over here.
Yeah.
Okay? So it's just like taking that and zooming in on it.
Okay.
And this way we can see there's your commanded motion. And then between about 20 to about 70 hertz or so, that's where we see things like prop wash, issues with forward flight smoothness. That's where the visible bad stuff is.
Yeah.
In fact, when you get much higher than 100 hertz, it's not something that actually shows up much in a camera.
Right.
Because we're sampling like your typical
But
camera.
it can affect the way the drone flies.
It can affect the way the drone flies. It can affect the motor heat and stuff like that. motor temperatures. But generally speaking, you know, you're sampling a camera at, say, 60 hertz. It can't see a lot beyond, say, 120 or 200 hertz or so, you know. So
it's interesting to me, Brian, that that the frequency just kind of seems to die at around 550, 600 hertz. I will say, though, when we were debating what we needed to capture, like what our sampling rate should be, it seems like we have a pretty good argument that we could go down to the 1600 kilohertz sampling rate, which would give us up to 800 kilohertz, half the value. And it seems like that would probably still, like, we're not going to be missing much.
Correct.
So we'll file that away. How are we going to evaluate the health of this drone?
Okay, so the first thing, anybody who's looking at this, first thing you're going to see is a bunch of peaks here. So the first question you should ask is, what am I looking at? What is this? Why does it go up here? Why does it go up here? Why does it then go up here and here and here?
What are these peaks?
What are these peaks? Right. Now, every drone is going to produce one thing you can always count on, unfortunately, is motor noise.
Right. So
as long as you have motors spinning, they're going to generate noise.
Right. And by noise, we mean vibration. Right. So the motors are spinning. They're spinning at a certain RPM. There's a frequency associated with that RPM, and we're going to get a big peak of vibration.
So now the question is, what portion of this is motor, and what portion of it might be something else?
Sure.
So how do we know what that is? Because if we know which part of this is motor, then Betaflight has a really special filter for motors, which is called RPM filtering.
Okay.
And that by default is going to take care of those motor noise peaks. But it's important to know whether there's other peaks that don't fall into those frequencies, because they would represent potential resonance frequencies.
Okay. How do we know if these peaks are the motors or if they're resonance? Like, what are we looking for here? That, like, what's good, what's bad?
So what you can do is you come down here, you'll see something in the drop down. This is on the Pro version. You'll see RPM notches. What this does is it's going to plot something called a cumulative distribution. Don't worry about what that means.
Okay.
But what it's going to show you is it's going to produce these lines, and the lines will sit where it's expecting the motor noise.
Okay.
Right? So if I push the first harmonic button, for example, when I click that, let's go back up then to the chart, and what you'll notice is you have these little lines sitting on top of it.
Okay.
Now these 4 lines, can I zoom in on that? So there's a little,
it's your software,
zoom
Brian.
tool here. There's a little zoom tool here. Well, I'm sort of playing the role of the user, right? Can I zoom in here?
Yeah.
Okay, so you just grab a little section there and zoom in, okay?
So I love it. You can zoom in. Okay. I don't know. Can you zoom in?
Fair enough.
Okay. So those lines represent where the motors are expected to be.
Exactly, right. So you can sort of draw.
So we got.
So the lowest RPM would have been somewhere here.
Yeah.
And the highest RPM of these motors would have been something here. Now wait, what are the colors? So you have a blue and a red.
I'm going to guess those are the 4 motors.
Yeah, so if you come down here, red represents motor 1, back right. Front right is motor 2.
Oh,
motor 3,
very
motor 4.
interesting.
Okay.
And we can see here that the, 2 of the motors, the purple and the red, the blue and the red, are at a lower frequency than the orange and the light blue, or cyan.
Yep.
And I'm going to guess that's the front and the back motors, and we have a difference because the battery is slightly to the back. And the back motors are spinning faster because the battery is slightly skewed towards the back, and the CG is not perfectly balanced.
Exactly.
I love it. And I see.
So actually, no. So it's the front motors that are at a higher RPM.
Oh, so we have. Oh, because we have a GoPro on the front. Oh, sure.
That's exactly it.
Okay. And then I also see that we have. So here's where the motors are expected to be. That's the motor RPMs.
Yeah.
And here's a peak, and that's the motor peak.
Correct.
And then here are the other 2 motors and another peak.
Correct.
So that's. Basically, we can look at that and go, that's what we expect. We can, for now, ignore those peaks.
That's right. So we know what those 2 peaks are. That's great. So let's zoom back out here. Okay, so there's our first 2 peaks. So now you can come down here and click the second harmonic.
Okay, so let's talk about harmonics.
Harmonics, right.
Harmonics, if you think about anytime you, like if you strum a guitar string or something, you'll have the primary frequency and then you'll have overtones. For any time you have anything like that, you've got a primary frequency and then harmonics going up. And the harmonics, is it double the frequency?
It's double the fundamental.
Double the fundamental.
So if the fundamental there is, say, 160 hertz, then the next one is going to be somewhere around 320,
etc.
And then the third will be another 160 above that.
And one of the characteristics of harmonics is that they are weaker than the fundamental. So we are only concerned with up to the third harmonic because, like, the fundamental frequency is the motor RPM. It's very, very strong.
Yeah.
The second harmonic is at double the frequency and it's weaker.
Yeah.
The third harmonic is at double that frequency and it's weaker. So we're going to higher frequency, which we care less about.
Yeah.
And we're getting weaker. And so we're not, there is a fourth and a fifth and a sixth and so on harmonic, but we don't care about them.
That's right. Well, in your case, there's not either because they're
well, I mean,
really
they exist, but we don't see them.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so now that we have a sense on what harmonics are, so what we can do is we want to understand what the rest of these peaks are.
Okay.
So let's now go to the second harmonic and plug that in.
Okay.
And now we can see that.
We can zoom in again.
We can zoom in again. Okay. And now you can see that this.
Yeah.
Again, lines up with this peak.
Yeah.
And these line up with this peak. Now you might notice that this peak here is a little bit off from that.
Yeah. So like I see.
So that could be a bit of a resonance, and we're gonna look at that. But
I see that we start like right here.
Yeah.
And then we go up to this peak, which is right underneath these lines.
Yeah.
But then the lines stop right about here, but the peak goes a little bit above it.
Exactly.
So that is not the motor RPM. That peak is something else.
Yes.
Our noise floor is right around here. That's like the noise floor of the gyro, I think. And then right around here looks like maybe like the noise floor of the quadcopter with the motors running. But then here we still got some elevation. So that's not a peak per se, but there's something going on here that might be worth like noticing.
That's right. Now note that when you said this is the noise floor, it doesn't mean that noise floor. So if you could remove all of those motor vibrations, it doesn't mean your noise floor goes steady across here.
No.
Because you know that it's starting here.
Yeah.
It tends to actually do this.
Yeah.
Right.
Go down.
A gradation as you move along, and that's in part because you have multiple layers of low pass filtering that's pushing it down like that.
Let me guess, Brian, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the third harmonic.
Correct.
And we're going to see that it will, let me zoom here. Let's see if I'm getting good at this. Oh no, I thought I was getting good. What did I do wrong?
Just go ahead. You hit the little hand.
Oh, my bad. Hit the home.
Just hit the home button. And
Let me do it.
Yeah.
You're going to hit the plus.
Yeah.
And I'm going to draw, there we go.
It's a pretty tiny little icon to click, and by the way, I didn't create that icon. That's a sort of default MATLAB thing. But
and so again here we've got this peak here, and it is well contained inside this motor RPM range, and likewise here, again well contained in the third harmonic is fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now let me mention something else here too. This is a you don't need to know what it means, but it's a logarithmic scale. But what it essentially means is everything below about -30, I usually give that as the cutoff, is very, very low. It's very low. So if you were to look for, so if you look at this little bit that you were talking about here or here, that's below, like, that's just above about -40 dB. You'd be hard pressed to find that in the gyro.
So anything below about -30 probably isn't much of a concern.
Exactly. And also, as you look at peaks, as you go up in frequency, these peaks are less and less important because they're going to be easily filtered as well by multiple things like the low pass filter besides your RPM filters, you know, and then you add more filtering onto the D term. By the time you get to the end result that goes out to the ESCs, most of this stuff is not going to be a problem, right?
So when we started this, what you said you wanted to do was just evaluate the baseline health of the, sort of the mechanical health of the build. Do we have electrical noise? Do we have some issue with our frame? Or maybe there's a bad motor or a bent prop? We're looking for those things. And essentially, I think what I'm getting is that we're just looking for any noise peaks that are not caused by either the motor fundamental or any of the motor harmonics. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so if you do have peaks that you think are not related to the motors, like we had some sense on that when we looked at the, I believe, the second harmonic, we noticed that this extended out beyond that. But you notice now that the third actually seems to cover a portion of this. So it's a possibility that what you're looking at here is a peak that's encompassing both the second and third.
Oh, because the third harmonic
holding steady.
Well, and the third harmonic of the back motors might overlap with the second harmonic of the front motors.
That's a good point. Oh, I didn't think of that.
Because they're not at the same. They're not
Damn,
at the
you're
same. Yeah, that's probably what this little
this is a
peak
process of also using your noggin to kind of think about this in a deeper way. So I didn't think of that. So that's exactly right. This is a special case because you have more weight in one.
Yeah.
So what I want you to try to pay attention to now, I'm just going to grab a markup tool here. And I'm going to draw in what I see as the noise floor. So imagine now that all of these harmonics, we could just pull them out of there. What's the noise floor? So it's going to be something from this point, it's going to be something that tracks along like this and slowly works its way down. You see what I'm doing here?
Yep.
See that? You got to skim across there because that's the floor.
Yep.
And then now we're at our floor right there, right?
Okay.
So pay attention to, pay attention to that.
Yeah.
Close it. Pay attention to this, don't pay attention to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing down here. I want you to pay attention to this. And this is a really subtle thing. Notice the floor here is a little bit more elevated.
On the roll axis, the noise starts at about minus 35 dB, whereas on the pitch axis, it's closer to minus 30.
Yeah.
And then the yaw axis is always, it's a weird one, but
it's great.
The yaw axis is very clean, and if we draw that line, it's something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Two things I see are we start at minus 40 or lower.
Yeah.
That's a lower. That's good. The other thing is that we at looking at like 480 hertz, it looks like that floor is lower compared to the roll and the pitch axis. So just basically the yaw axis is lower in noise.
Yeah. So this is something to just keep your eyes peeled for, because you're going to come across, if you do this for any period of time, you're going to see dramatic differences in these.
So we want to see that, ideally, we would want to see that below minus 40.
Yeah, that's the ideal case.
Okay.
You're going to have rare builds that are that low, but yeah, that's what your target is in a sense.
Okay, so if it's below minus 40, we're just like, damn, that's good.
Happy day.
And then, is there a threshold above which you'd be like, whoa, something's wrong here?
Yeah, so like when you get much above minus 30, let's say minus 25 or so, you really want to work at it. But sometimes you don't have any choices, right? There's not much you can do.
Like if you show me this quad and you say, well, like what are we going to do? I'm not going to rip this thing apart to put a new capacitor in it. I know the frame is sound. Like we didn't see any signs. Like so, like sometimes you're just going to bite the bullet and plow ahead. One thing you did mention is that you can change the ESC PWM frequency, and what you said was that raising the PWM frequency will often reduce the noise level. Although there are effects of doing that, higher PWM frequency means you have less motor torque and worse braking.
Yeah.
But if you're absolutely concerned first and foremost with smooth flight and minimum noise, setting your PWM, you have to go into your ESC settings to do that. We're not going to show you how to do that because this isn't that video. But raising that up to like 48 kilohertz might help, or even higher might help.
That's right.
Okay. So in my case, like my noise isn't as good as we'd like it to be, but it's generally below negative 30, maybe as high as like roughly 35, maybe. So we'd like it to be better, but it's not so bad that we would, and fundamentally we're just going to plow ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And then this is a long range copter. Very likely you're going to be using stabilized footage as well. So then it's less of a concern for forward flight smoothness and stuff. So,
okay. So the next step is that we're going to try to see where the lowest RPM that our motors go to is, so that we can set our filters. And I think it's worth sort of taking a big picture view of where we're at and why we're doing this. The number one thing that you need as a foundation for a good PID tune, well, the number one thing is a mechanically sound quad. And then the number two thing is you need to filter out the motor noise as much as you can, but no more. Because adding filters, what's the downside Like, why don't I just have all the filtering in the world so I get rid of the motor noise? What's the negative effect of that?
Because it delays the PID controller.
Adds delay.
It adds delay. It's something we call filter delay. You don't need to know what that is, but it essentially delays the PID controller. And in effect, what that does is the PID controller is acting on things that happened
Right.
some time ago. And you don't want that. You want
Right.
the PID controller needs to be correcting errors that's happening at this moment. And even a few milliseconds can be problematic. Now, we're going to look at filter delay as we do this a little bit, just to glance at it. We won't talk too much about it, but can at least give you a target for what you're looking for. Yeah.
So if we know what the minimum RPM of the motors is, then we know how low our filters need to go and no lower, and that allows us to get enough filtering without excess delay. So how do we know what the minimum RPM of our motors is?
Okay, so we can just come on over here. You can point your mouse at the, actually, you can click on this little data tip and then come down here and just click on the trace itself. And what you're looking for is the point where we know this is motor, and that's the lowest point we can go, which is about 110 or so hertz, right? You see that's where it starts to curve up there.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. So somewhere around 110 hertz or so. Now, okay, so let's keep that number in mind.
110 hertz.
110 hertz. And now let's go into Betaflight and think about this.
So we'll go over to Betaflight.
So we're going to go to PID tuning, and then we're going to come over here to the filter settings tab. And you can see there's a lot going on here, but I'm going to point your attention down here to the gyro RPM filter.
Okay.
And the gyro RPM filter has the RPM filter harmonics number and the gyro RPM filter minimum frequency.
Okay.
And we want to set that minimum frequency to the lowest point of motor noise that we have.
Yep.
Now, we saw earlier that the motor noise lowest point during that hover test was roughly 110 hertz or so. Now, why wouldn't we? Now, we don't want to set that exactly at 110 hertz because there's another thing happening behind the scenes, which is a fader of sorts.
I see.
It's called an RPM fader, and there's a range over which it fades those RPM filters out.
Because I'm noticing that for a 5-inch drone, the default is 100 hertz.
That's right.
This is a 7-inch drone, which has a lower RPM, so I assume we would need to lower that number down.
Yes, exactly.
So if our lowest motor is 110 hertz, how are we going to get this number that we want to put in? So we want to
go probably 25 to 30 hertz lower than that point.
Okay.
So I'd probably bring this down to about 80 or 85.
Okay. So we'll put 80 in here.
Yeah.
All right, and we're going to leave the RPM filter harmonics at 3.
That's right.
Okay.
And then we're going to save.
What about gyro low pass 1? I've seen some other PID tuning guides that say to turn off gyro low pass 1 because less filtering reduces delay.
That's right. So you notice that the noise above 500 hertz is pretty low, right?
Yep.
It's really low. So when you see something like that where the noise is well below minus 40 dB,
well below,
you can certainly turn off low pass 1. Now you might ask, why would we turn off 1 instead of 2? Well, in part because gyro low pass 2 also has something called an anti-aliasing filter.
Which you want.
Which you want. You want to leave that on. So if you're going to turn off 1 low pass, you just turn off that low pass 1.
Okay.
Okay? So I think that's all we need to do at this moment. If we think that we have any resonance peaks and they start to appear while we're tuning, we can always make some changes to the dynamic notch system to deal with that.
Okay.
So that's what this set of filters is. But for now, I think just leaving that as it is should be fine.
Having said that, I got to ask, like, I know that the gyro RPM filter specifically targets the motor RPM and the motor harmonics, right? Good. So we've configured that correctly. Another thing that I've done, and I've seen done in other PID tuning guides, is we'll adjust the gyro and D-term low pass, but we're leaving those sliders alone.
So yeah, so these sliders actually change the cutoff frequencies of your low pass
I
filters.
see low pass 2 moving, low pass 2 moving up and down as I move that gyro filter multiplier.
Right. So as we push that down further and further, we lower that cutoff here, right? But remember, that's going to also increase our filter delay.
Okay.
So the fact that we've already saw that there's very little noise above 500 hertz, say, that's why we decided to turn off gyro low pass 1. So there's no reason then to go and add more delay again by then lower, setting the second low pass at a lower cutoff.
Yeah.
That'd be defeating the purpose in a sense.
It feels like gyro low pass 2 isn't doing very much. If it's starting at 500 hertz and we have almost no noise above 500
That's
hertz.
a common misconception. So you might think because the cutoff is at 500 hertz, a low pass filter lets the low frequencies pass, so to speak, and then filters the high frequencies. But that cutoff is not a hard cutoff. In other words, just because it says 500 doesn't mean that it's not filtering below the cutoff. It does some filtering below the cutoff as well.
Okay.
But it's a gradation, right, as the frequency goes up.
And then the same question I asked before, if 500 is the right value for a 5-inch, shouldn't a 7-inch have a lower value?
Possibly, but it's not necessary.
Okay.
If you don't have any broadband noise there.
Okay.
And let's be clear for a minute. These are peaks, right?
Right.
And so the best target, the best filter that's going to attack a peak is a notch.
So I think what you're saying is that the RPM filter is going to target these peaks specifically, and then that's going to leave like this slope that you drew earlier. And when we look at that sort of background noise, like here we've got almost nothing.
Yeah.
And then even if we look somewhere like here, right, that looks like that's not a peak, that's some kind of background noise, if you will. Even that one is well below -40, -45. That number is so low, we probably don't need any additional low pass filtering, that the RPM filter alone is pretty much going to do the job.
That's right.
And you're using -40 roughly as the threshold where you might leave that low pass one on?
Somewhere between -30 and -40. I've often said -30, but yeah.
Okay.
And now that's during a steady hover. So
Right.
you know that when you get out there aggressively flying, all of that's going to be elevated.
Okay.
So these sort of reference points, they're just reference points that tend to work that are with reference to a steady hover, but they tend to work and generalize to your real world flight as well, yeah.
So we're going to save that. Now we're going to do the actual PID tuning. And a lot of people, when they PID tune, they will say you want to do a throttle ramp, go from 0 to full throttle, or they'll say you want to go out and do flips and rolls, fly around, sharp turns. You have a different philosophy. How do you PID tune?
Well, there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing full flips and rolls. Here's the problem with it, though. Typically, when you go out and you do that kind of thing, put your goggles on, of course, you're cruising along. There's nothing really happening when you're just cruising. Then you flip, you get a big, massive change in the rotation rate, and then it's nothing. Then a flip, nothing. Then a flip. So what happens is you theoretically you don't actually get a lot of data. So
how do you PID tune?
Yeah. So what we developed something called a wobble test.
So what we're going to do is we're going to take off. You like to do this in angle mode.
So you can do it in angle or acro, but if you do it in acro, you're going to want to set your rates in such a way that you don't accidentally hit the stick and
just be out of control. Yeah. And you're just gonna like front, back, left, right. Yaw axis too?
You can, but it's tricky, right? And so I tend to avoid the yaw axis in part because Betaflight also doesn't have any yaw sliders.
Well, we've got yaw.
Things,
we don't have separate sliders on the yaw axis?
No, there's no.
How do you tune the yaw axis?
That's a damn good question.
Well, there's PIDs on the yaw axis.
There are, but there's no D term, so there's no PD ratio and all that. We talked about those things yet.
The other argument that people are going to make is if all I'm doing is well, isn't it going to be different when I do a full stick flip and roll?
Yeah.
Like, is tuning at 10% deflection going to carry over to full deflection?
And the answer
is tuning at low throttle going to carry over to tuning at high throttle?
And the answer is yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, why is that?
You know what? Here's the thing. You've tuned thousands of drones using this technique. I'm actually just willing to take you at your word, and we'll see at the end of the video whether this pans out.
Fair enough.
Okay, now tell me why. Go ahead, tell me why, but I'm probably going to edit it out of the video.
Yeah, no problem. Well,
before we go and do the wobble test, I know that Betaflight has a lot of ways that it like screws with the PIDs. It's got things like iTerm relax and feed forward and Dmax and PID attenuation. And do we want to simplify that at all so we get like clean results?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things you're going to want to do for sure. So one of them is something called iTerm relax, which you brought up. So over here we have this thing called iTerm relax. What is this? Essentially what this is something you could call it an anti-wind-up algorithm, an anti-iTerm wind-up algorithm. And this anti-wind-up algorithm was designed to deal with that. By default, it's set at 15, which works really well for a 5-inch or 6-inch and smaller, right? But as you get to larger and larger crafts, what you're going to want to do is drop that number a bit.
Okay.
For something like a lifter, 8, 9, 10-inch, really big rigs, I would drop that down as low as about 5. For something like this, like a 7-inch, I would probably drop that to about 7 or 8.
Yeah, and we've got some guidelines here in the tooltip.
Yeah.
But I think when we do the wobble test, do you recommend that we turn that off entirely?
No, I would just drop it a little bit.
Just drop it a little bit, to whatever the recommended value is.
To about 7
So let's see, 10 for heavier freestyle, 3 to 5 for X class. Seems like you said something like 10.
Somewhere between those, yeah.
Like, what do you think, 7, 10, 8, 9, 10?
8,
8?
probably, yeah.
Okay, for a 7-inch. Okay, any other changes we need to make before we do the wobble test?
Okay, so let's just save that. Dynamic damping is essentially creates 2 D terms, a lower and a higher. And for normal flight, you're going to essentially be at this D term, and if you make aggressive stick inputs, you'll quickly bump up to the Dmax and then jump back down.
The idea is that D is most needed when the quad is moving abruptly. And so a D term that is correct for like a snap 180 is way too high for normal cruising, and then you'll get hot motors and so forth. And so the idea is that when we're doing normal straight cruising with the stick basically centered, then we'd have a lower D gain, and then when I snap the stick over to do a roll, we jump to the higher D gain.
Exactly, exactly.
So our general approach is going to be to find the correct ratios of the various terms, right?
That's
and
right.
then we'll adjust the master multiplier to get the sort of overall magnitude correct.
That's right.
Okay.
Now, and the key ratio, really the one that's at the heart of it, is what we would call the P to D ratio.
Okay.
So there's really 2 that are critical for PID tuning. There's a P to D relationship, and we want to optimize that, so we get what we would call a P to D balance. And then there's a P to I ratio. And so what we're going to do is set up the sliders to first start with the P to D, to first start to optimize the P to D ratio.
And if you want to know more information about specifically what PID and feedforward do, again, I've got that other video linked in the video description below where I go deep into that. But I would say the short version is that P sort of accelerates the aircraft to rotate in response to stick inputs, and D kind of damps or pulls back or opposes it to try to limit overshoot. And they need to be in the correct ratio to each other. If P pushes too hard, you get a lot of overshoot and oscillation. If D is pulling too hard, you get slower response. And then also D makes your motors hot and makes your quad fly away in extreme cases. In extreme cases.
It need not necessarily do that, but so we're going to make sure that doesn't happen.
We need the right ratio of P to D.
Yeah.
So what changes do you make here before you do the PID tune? Like I know there's at least one slider I think that you turn off entirely.
Yeah, there's a few actually. So let's leave the first 2 for now. We're going to come down and take the stick response down.
Okay.
We don't want feed forward active right now, right? So I think again that video you have describes pretty well what feed forward does.
Things.
Yeah, exactly. And then we're going to also take the dynamic damping out. We want to keep that D constant.
Right, because if the D is changing all the time, it's going to throw our results off.
Yeah. Now, after we've established the proper P to D balance, we can then decide how we want to utilize dynamic damping. And then we can take the iTerm out as well. Now, sometimes I say you could leave a little bit of this in so that you don't get too much drift while you're doing wobble test. It doesn't matter too much, to be honest. I think we can just leave it off.
I'm going to take off. Okay. And then I want to do, how many? 20, 25 you said?
20 or so moves on each axis. So you want to go a little faster than that. Yeah.
Oh, that is really disorienting. Yeah. I can see why you might want to do it line of sight. Okay, so hang on. Now I've screwed it up because I stopped, right? Do I need to try it? Do I need to start over?
No, go for it. I mean, if you can do it, do it. But
you okay with that? I'm
okay with it.
Okay, let me go out in the field a little bit. Oh no, I'm screwing it up. I'm creating that dead space. Okay, I am flying and I am wobbling at the same time. Oh, this is all right. I'm fine. I'm fine. Whoa, geez. Okay. Okay, that's probably good. And then I said I also wanted to do yaw, although you said it may not matter.
Then you don't need
No, this is great. This was great. This was hilarious. Okay.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people think that it's easier when you put your goggles on, but it's pretty.
No, it's so.
You know what else it points to?
Yeah.
People say, "Well, what? These are just little tiny twitchy movements." I'm like, "No, they're not."
No, I mean I was going full. I was going full stick. Full stick. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see how much Blackbox we recorded.
Okay, so we go to Blackbox.
No.
bad.
No, fine.
Yeah.
Fine. Plenty of time. Plenty of
So
space.
do we want to just save it?
So yeah, saved a file.
Okay. So
I'll
now,
name it 02.
let's name it 02 PD 0.6.
0.6. Oh yeah, because
what I'm
we gotta do the test multiple times,
Exactly.
and we gotta change the values so we can
Right.
see the difference. Oh, we're gonna be here for a minute.
Let's call it MM 1.02.
Master Multiplier 1.0.
Yeah.
So our PD sliders at 0.6, our Master Multipliers at 1.0.
We don't have to put all the other details.
Yeah,
It's too
just
much
the relevant
but
ones.
That's relevant, yeah.
Okay, good point. We're gonna go to the PID tuning tab. We're gonna go from 0.6 to 0.8. We'll go 2 clicks. Well, actually that's 4 clicks on the slider, but 0.6, 0.8, 0.2. We're gonna save that. We're gonna do another wobble test. I'll show you guys what a wobble test looks like line of sight, the correct way. And then we're gonna do 0.6, 0.8, 1.0, 1.2, 1.4, basically 5 runs.
Yeah.
And we're just gonna do all of those. I'm gonna land, I'm gonna disarm in between each one, and then I'm gonna change it. I'm not gonna download the Blackbox log because that's slow, and we're gonna just get all of that stuff in one chunk.
Yeah, hopefully it all fits in.
It'll all fit, it'll all fit. Do we wanna, is that good? Is that good right there?
That's pretty good, yeah. I'd like to do one just to show you what I think is needed.
Okay.
So you notice I tend to like to do both axes simultaneously. I'm just kind of randomly injecting inputs in there.
So that was actually harder than I thought it was going to be, a line of sight. I'm not the best line of sight pilot in the world. I think what we can do is here in rate profile settings, I'm going to leave my preferred rates on rate profile 1. I'm going to change to rate profile 2. And we're going to go to linear rates. And we're going to do that by raising center sensitivity.
Yeah, so what I would do here, this is my recommendation.
Yeah.
What I say is that we're creating what I would call a tuning rate, right? And I would actually just go 150, 150.
Oh wow, that is super low. 150, 150, 0, 150, 150, 0, 150, 150, 0, and save.
So now let me explain something to you.
Yeah.
This actual number doesn't affect the angle. It's the shape of the curve that's changed. So it's only when you have that sort of expo curve that it's really affecting. So whether you're at 150, 150, or 500, 500, the effect on angle mode is the same.
Well, okay, so if we were going to do the wobble test in acro, then this 150, 150 would make it much easier to stay in control.
Yes.
But the main thing we're concerned with is that since Betaflight 4.5, I think, the acro mode rate curve also applies to angle mode.
That's right.
And that can make it really hard to do this kind of thing because it's non-linear. So we want this to be linear.
It'll be linear. And another thing we're going to do is go back to PIDs, and right down here you'll see an angle limit.
Angle limit
is 60. We don't need the copter going.
We're going to set that to like 30?
30, exactly.
Okay, so that's going to make it easier to stay in control when we're doing the wobble test. Okay, let's offload that black box while we're at it.
Yep.
Oh, well, we didn't do gosh dang anything. All right, we'll just keep going.
Why don't we just keep going?
We'll make that change. We'll go PID tuning 0.6, and we'll go to 0.8, and save.
Yeah.
Let me see if I know what to do here.
Reset.
Oh, but we don't need this log. This
You
is
don't
this is the
necessarily,
old
but
log.
you can hold 100 logs in there, no trouble.
Okay, no, do not clear.
Just in case you want to come back.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
We'll do open file, and we're going to open this file, which has all of our tests in it. There are multiple logs in that single file.
Yeah.
We want to do all of these?
Okay, so no, you don't want to do that because a lot of these are just quick arm, disarm. So be real careful and think about which one.
Look at the duration.
Yeah, exactly. So I would pick 2, 4.
Yeah, 1.4 seconds, I see.
Yeah.
42 seconds.
Yeah, you may as well grab those.
26 seconds, 44, 27, 21. Those all look like real things.
Exactly.
Well, okay.
There seems to be more that we might have done one test twice. I think we did both.
Yeah, I did it once and it was shitty, and then you did it. It's harder than you think. I mean, you're like, okay, I'm going to wobble test. You clearly are better at it than me.
But it's also why I make those settings, right? Make those adjustments to make it easier. So this looks great, right? So what, I mean, if you look at this, this is a good indication too that these are not tiny little movements.
No,
right?
No, lots of movement.
You can get away with a lot less movement than that. A lot of times I have lots of clients that might not be that great at line of sight. So I'll bring that angle limit down to 20 if I feel like it's getting out of control, right? All right, so we're going to come on over to the step response. Now, remember earlier I mentioned that you could trim these. It's not super important for the step response because the tool now ignores anything that's not at least 20 degrees per second. So
it's automatically going to filter.
It's automatically going to ignore this stuff anyway. So that's fine. So we can come on over to the step response tool. Now,
just maximize that.
Yeah, I'll maximize that. So these are our files. Now we don't know which ones are which, unfortunately, because we didn't. We don't have, but
that's okay because the tool is going to show us.
Yeah. So for now, let me just plot them all so I can figure out which is which because I don't know which is which. Let me just hit run on that. Okay, interesting. So it looks like we've got some duplications here. 45.7. So the first one is a duplicate.
How do you know that?
Because your PIDs are here.
Okay, so here's our 7 logs, and here are the PID, Dmax, and feed forward for each of the logs. And so we're looking at D, and D, I see, it's not showing us the slider position, it's showing us the number, but that's okay.
Actually, you can see that with the little button on here, Betaflight slider.
Oh, that's good, I like that.
It actually shows you the slider positions, but because we have duplicates, it's not working right there. So what you want to do is...
So number 1 and 2 must be when I did the test and then you did the test. So we need to get rid of number 1.
We'll just plot number 2. Yeah, we'll get rid of number 1. We're going to want 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Okay.
So let's just reset that. We'll leave that.
This is the first time we've seen the step response graph, and the long version of how to interpret the step response graph, I'm going to refer you back to my fundamentals video that I've been talking about on and off. It's linked in the video description below. It goes in depth into what is PID feed forward, what is step response. But the short version is that at any given time, the stick input is telling the flight controller that it should be rotating at a certain rate. And when the PID controller is making the quadcopter rotate at that rate, we will see the line right here, a flat line 1.0. The reality is that there's always a delay. When I move the stick, again, the analogy, go back to a thermostat, if the room is 70 degrees and I set the thermostat at 68 degrees, it's not going to immediately go to 68 degrees, it's going to come down. And so we see this delay here. The line comes up, it hits 1.0, and that means that the quad has achieved the commanded rate, and then when it goes over the line, it means it's exceeded the rate. Okay. So what we basically want to see, well, what we actually want to see is going to be the subject of the rest of this video, but what we basically want to see is, we want to see that line hit the commanded rate as fast as possible and stay there. Would you agree or disagree?
That's right.
Okay, so now having said that, what do you see when you look at this step response graph?
So what you see here is when our slider was at damping of 0.6, that's the red case here.
The lowest.
So, so P45, D17, you can see the signal comes in fast, but then overshoots dramatically, right?
And the reason for that is that D damps the P term.
That's right.
When there is not enough D, you get overshoot and oscillation on the P term.
Right.
So that's what we would expect to see.
Yeah. So we're not getting really much oscillation, but certainly overshoot.
You get a little, like no, not oscillation per se, but we get overshoot, rebound, and then it just kind of tails off there.
Exactly. So if we drop the D even more, you would saw more of a ripple there. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then as we increase the D, so this is systematically going up to D 0.8. That's the orange.
The bounce back gets smaller.
And then D 1.0, it's smaller again. That's yellow. And then D 1.2 and 1.4 are pretty close, overlapping here. But so you notice here, though, that everything is drifting off that line.
Yeah, what I'm used to seeing is that you have some overshoot or oscillation, but then basically the line finally settles to the commanded rate, and it's a straight line horizontally. Why does the line like tail off like it's going down a cliff?
Yeah, so some of that's going to be due to the lack of iTerm. So we've set iTerm at 0, so that's going to play into that. And but in part, we were trying to make sure that none of the overshoot was going to be interfered with by the iTerm.
Okay.
But we might want to turn the iTerm up a bit,
right,
to make this more interpretable.
We don't have enough iTerm.
But
and it's
another thing we can do is we can use this thing called Y correction. And what this is going to do is it's kind of artificially kind of push these lines so that they all sit at the 1. It just helps us interpret this little bump at the
shape.
The shape at
helps
the
us interpret the shape without the position.
Because this portion of the plot really is related to the P to D balance.
So you're saying the shape of the curve.
Yeah.
If the curve is below the line, that means that the whole thing was slow, but the shape of the curve, how much overshoot, how much rebound, how much oscillation, that's the PD balance, and that's what we're really focused on here.
Correct.
All right.
So to clean this up, to make it a little easier to see, let's first just plot those last two. Okay. So that's these two here.
Because we can see, do you agree like the first like two or three?
The first three are definitely overshooting.
They're overshooting, and we don't want that.
We don't want that.
Okay.
So we'll reset that, but the second thing we'll do is we'll click this Y correct button to make this interpretation a little easier. So we'll just click that. Okay, and this makes it a lot easier to see. So it's not doing a great job on the Y correction, because normally all that does is, it's like a DC offset, but if it's drifting in one direction, you'll still see that drift. So, but you can clearly see now though that you really need that 1.4. You see that orange, right? The 1.2, that's the red now, where the D is at 35, is still really overshooting. It's rippling up like that and then coming back down. Right? So again, that shape question, right?
Right. And then that's the roll axis. On the pitch axis, they're much closer.
A little bit closer, but then pitch by default has a little more D. That's just the way Betaflight sets it up in the sliders, right?
The other thing we have to mention, although I don't think we should try to account for it yet, because I think it would be too much at this point, is that this drone is going to be much less responsive on the pitch axis than the roll axis. If you look at the roll axis, all of the weight is centered around the roll axis, and so it will rotate very readily on the roll axis, whereas the weight is very spread out on the pitch axis, and so we would expect to see higher P gains necessary on the pitch than the roll axis.
That's right, exactly. And if you look at the result over here, so over here are plots that show you the peak, okay, the peak response and the latency. So the latency is kind of like in your video what you described as rise time.
Yeah.
It's akin to that.
Yeah. So we want the latency ideally to be as low as possible, although we'll only be able to get it so low without negative effects.
Correct. But notice the difference in the latency between roll and pitch. Just take this case alone.
Yeah.
You're at about 26 milliseconds here on roll. You're close to 36 almost on pitch. So it's dramatic. It's like a third slower.
Yeah.
Right? So we definitely want to boost that pitch axis. I have a good intuition about how far to boost it.
Yeah.
And you could do a lot of tests kind of tinkering around with that. Okay. But definitely you're going to want to boost that up a few notches. Okay. And for the next test. So what I would like to do now is do that 1.4 again on the damping. Okay.
So you feel like this is showing us that a 1.4 damping is about right.
About right.
We're getting a little bit of overshoot.
Yeah.
Not any real rebound. It kind of overshoots a tiny bit and then it settles. And the fact that it's sagging down here, you attribute to the lack of eye gain.
Yes, I'm going to add a little bit of eye turn as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we go back to Betaflight. Yeah. We'll go to PID tuning.
So let's leave the 1.4 on the damping.
Okay.
And then come on down to, let's start at the drift wobble, the iTerm.
Okay.
Let's bring that up to about 0.2.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Right. Still not enough that it would cause any interference with the PND.
Right.
But
now we're going to want a real boost on those pitch damping and tracking.
So we see that there is a much longer rise time, or a much higher latency on pitch.
Yeah.
And we see it kind of overshoots, but then it never really gets back down.
Yeah, well, in part,
right?
I think it's because of that, something that's going on there because of the iTerm. And then when you use that Y correction, it's trying to artificially push it up there. So
the Y correction.
Off.
Yeah, oh, with the Y correction off, it never actually hits. It doesn't really overshoot.
No.
It just barely gets to the commanded rate, and then it's just like, bleh.
Yeah, but it's pretty flat from that point on, right? So again, back to that shape idea, right? Because something else is happening here to cause that. Okay, so let's go back then. So we boosted the iTerm a little bit. So now let's take those pitch sliders and bring the pitch tracking up to about 1.3 and the damping 1.3.
So we're just going to move, you said we move those sliders together.
Yeah,
and we're going to raise them, and we're going to try to get the pitch axis to look more like the roll axis.
Yeah.
And when we do that,
we want both of them. They should be both. This next test, we should see both of them right on that.
Like they should be really flat.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's the file, looks great.
Okay, and then we will step response tool.
And let's just plot that one. Just
right there, and run.
Reset.
Oh, reset? I see.
And then run.
I see.
That's better. That's better.
Okay, so...
It's not great, but it's certainly better.
I certainly see that the pitch and roll are much more similar.
Yeah.
And if we look at the latency, 26, still a little slower on pitch than roll, but getting closer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's impossible to get pitch to where roll is, but boosting it a little bit's not a bad idea. Maybe we could boost it a little bit more, 1.4.
Yeah.
And then from there we could start boosting the Master Multiplier, because I think that's going to also tighten up the whole overall curve.
Yeah. Do we want to raise I to try and get this line to track horizontally?
Yeah. Let's do that. So let's raise it up to about 0.4.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go back to
PID tuning. We'll go I gains to 0.4. And
then pitch 1.4 on both.
Just one notch, you think?
I think so. So there's two things to consider here. On the one hand, you're trying to get pitch to be nearly as responsive as roll, but on the other hand, you also want to be able to boost the master at some point, and you don't want to inject too much noise.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
in some ways, you've got to compromise for the fact that you have that
physics
weight.
Still exists.
Physics still exists, and you're not going to get everything out of pitch that you're going to get out of roll with that design.
And there's going to be negative consequences. If we were to increase the P gains so much that pitch became as responsive as roll, then we might get like a ton of overshoot or something.
Well, you're going to get a ton more noise. You have to, when you push the master up, when you're pushing up pitch gains, you're also pushing pitch D. And that means more noise. So you're limiting yourself in other ways, right? So if you really cared about that, you would want a drone that had more centralized weight, like an ultralight racing drone. That's more symmetrical. This just isn't that. That's right. But it actually brings up a good point, though, because it really, to me, it's good information about what to look for when you think about a frame, right? A lot of people don't think about frame geometry. They think about it for the purpose of, what you're doing. In this case, you want a long-range drone where you don't see the props.
Sure.
But, is the trade-off worth it? In some cases, I think in some cases it is. Some cases you might think it's not. It just depends on who you are as a person and what you want, right, out of the drone. I
think the way I would frame that would be to say that don't get so hung up on looking at lines on graphs that you forget that you're tuning a real quadcopter that's a physical object, and you have to take into account things like weight distribution. You have to take into account if you have maybe small motors that you may not only be able to get so much responsiveness before the motors just can't give you anymore. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, some frames too are just more, they'll tend to squish this together. Like you have this sticking out, it restricts where you can put that. The battery itself is long. You can also purchase batteries that are more centralized. Some people might even do that. You can't do that.
Toilet bowl mount.
You can't do that on this frame, but But it goes to show how dramatically different it can be. And if you weren't looking at plots like this, how would you ever know?
Right. You certainly wouldn't know by feel.
Yeah.
I mean, what I've done in the past
You'd feel something, but you wouldn't know how far to push it.
I've done flips and rolls and looked for bounce back on flips and rolls.
Yeah.
And that's how in the past, when I've done just by feel tuning.
Yeah.
But this is better.
Yeah. certainly when you go to do a test, we're going to compare the defaults versus the tune.
Yeah.
It's going to be pretty dramatic, I think.
All right.
Yeah.
Here we go. Let me try this one. I'm gonna try this one.
Go for it.
You know, it makes it really, oh, hallelujah. Oh, I love it. Okay, so that was enough eye gain.
Yeah.
Now, we might want more, you know, in terms of fly. Yeah, we're not done yet.
No, no.
But that's like the minimum amount to make it not be shitty.
Exactly, yeah. And you know, it depends, because there's so much weight, I just didn't realize that it would be, that you're swinging all that weight around, right?
Yeah. Like on a little 5-inch, you probably could take eye all the way to 0 and it would be fine.
That's right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then as far as latency, we've got around 25 and closer to 30. So latency didn't really get any better.
Not a lot. Now, I want to point something out here.
Yeah.
There's two measures of latency, and I'd like to mention them because what's important here is that this latency is drawn from the step response itself.
Right.
Right? It's actually this 50% point. But there's another measure of latency which is actually more closely tied to the time between the set point and gyro. It's a mathematical algorithm called cross correlation, but it gives you a better measure of the actual distance between your set point and gyro. So if you're ever in doubt and you're wondering which one is better, more reliable, this one here, the set point to gyro delay, will give you that. So when you press that, it'll plot those here. So this is more closely related to the actual time difference between the set point and gyro. So 26 and 30. So I just want to show you that in the actual file. So what that is that was our last file. So if I zoom in on this and just grabbing at one of these. By the way, these are looking really good now, really tight.
I see. One of those is the set point, which is the stick movement, and one is the gyro, which is the actual quadcopter movement, and the separation between them is
And so if you take the period button here, when you click this button, it's waiting for 2 inputs, right? So I'll just press that, take your crosshairs down, start at the red, and then come on over here to the black. And you can see you get 24 milliseconds. I
see.
Okay? Yes. So that number you're getting in here is pretty closely tied to that. You see it's 26 here. It depends on the given movement. So it's kind of an average of all of those differences, right? And so sometimes I like to look at that. So you still could use a boost on pitch, but I'd recommend just from this point, because you're already at pushing those pitch gains up to 6, you know, they're getting pretty high. I would just start boosting the master now. And what's going to happen is both of those latencies are going to come down, but one is going to start to asymptote before the other. It's going to be roll. And what's going to happen then is pitch is going to start to catch up. So, so I would just start boosting the master multiplier. You're almost there.
It did get a little better in the second one. And there's some, it looks like on roll, it actually got a little worse, but I think that's just noise. That's just like natural variability.
One of the other things with latency is that the latency is highly dependent on how aggressive you are on the sticks.
So maybe I was just,
So you were a little bit lighter than I was.
I see.
And so that's what's making the latency.
Is that an argument in favor of doing it with programming?
It is. It is actually, but you just get good at it after a while where you're very repetitive, but you're absolutely right. This in particular, this part of the tuning, the master multiplier part, because it relies on a metric that's so sensitive to how aggressive the input is, that it's good to be really consistent, or like you say, use that.
So the yaw response looks like garbage. And I think what we're getting here is we just didn't really do a lot on yaw, this means nothing. We don't have good data here.
So always pay attention to this little number here, n equals. So n refers to the number of observations. If you want to know exactly what that is, just out of curiosity, just plot the pitch alone for me for a second. Reset and run. And then hit the raw button. What that does is it plots up all the individual traces.
Oh, look at that.
Right. So what's going into that average is all of that stuff, right? Some of that's junk, you know? And there's a little bit of quality control going on. There's some wildly outrageous numbers. Those are taken out altogether, right? And this is why what you're left with here for yaw is, 5 or 6 or 7, 10 exactly, traces that are not great. Right?
So we would need more movement on the yaw axis. So we feel like that we've got the PD balance about right. The shape of that curve is about what we want to see. It's coming up, it's not significantly overshooting, it's not oscillating.
Yeah.
If we had excess P, that's where we started. Hang on one second.
Again, it's always relative to something, so it's not excess P, it's excess of P.
Relative to D. Yeah, well, that's where we started. We started with excess P because the D was too low, and we had that big overshoot. Yeah. And then what would it look like if we had too much D?
That's a good question. Essentially what happens with too much D, if I can just use the markup tool here, is you'd start to see, so let me see if I can draw this. So you'd start to see this would come up, and then it would start to curve in here. And then as you add more and more D, it'd curve in more and more there, right?
Yeah.
So you're basically, but see the problem with it is unless you have a reference point, it doesn't look like
there was
overdamping.
There was one we did. When I saw this yaw axis trace, it made me, now I would, let's turn on the Y. Yeah. So to me, this y-axis, this yaw trace, now it's not excess D. It's just a coincidence that it looks like that. But that to me looks like an overdamped, because it's coming up, but then it's significantly. Oh, it's taking forever to get there.
Right.
Okay.
That's iTerm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big part of that.
Yeah.
But PTerm as well.
Yeah.
So we all know, right? The y-axis has way less authority, and so you're absolutely right. That's what.
But that's what it would look like. But what we did is, you never want to get into a situation where you have too much D gain, because it can smoke your motors, make your quad fly away. So that's why when we started, we took D all the way down to something low, and then worked it up. So you should really never be in a situation where you actually get to excess D gain. You're going to get it just to the right spot and stop.
That's right.
Okay. So then once the PD balance is correct, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to tweak the Master Multiplier.
That's
right. Okay, so what are we going to, it's at 1.0.
So we're just going to boost it up in steps of 0.2 as well, just like we did with the D. So I would just boost this. Now we've got this test with the current exact configuration. So I would just boost this up to 1.2.
Okay.
And wobble.
Okay.
And so we'll do 1.2, 1.4. This is the case where you want to be probably analyzing between each test.
Right, because things can get out of control.
Things can get out of control.
Yeah.
Unless you really know your copter well. Like I think you could do 1.2 and 1.4 without a problem.
We started at 1.0, and I would guess the reason we started at 1.0 is we know that the Betaflight PIDs are tuned for a 5-inch. This is a 7-inch. We know the PIDs are going to have to go up because the bigger quad needs more oomph to move.
That's right.
If we were tuning like a 3-inch or a 2-inch, would we have started with a lower Master Multiplier?
Sometimes, yeah. So and again, it comes. The more knowledge you have about this, the more experience you have with it, you kind of get a sense on where it should be.
Okay.
Let's just say, like racing drones in particular, some of these now are running 2100 kV motors.
Right.
They weigh like 500 grams.
Right. They need the PIDs to come down.
Those things are overtuned at default.
Right.
Yeah, you're going to hear the trilling rate out of the gate, right?
So it's really about your thrust to weight ratio.
Yeah.
As much as anything else.
Yeah. So sometimes there's a clue in the hover point. So if you see it, if you arm and you hover, and it seems to hover at like 20% throttle, it's got roughly a 5-to-1 power to weight ratio.
So we would say that larger drones than a 5-inch probably start the Master Multiplier at 1.0 and work up.
Or even 1.2. Yeah. I often start lifters at 1.2. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Smaller 5-inch start at 1.0 because that's what it's tailored for. And then
or even 0.8 to be just on the side of undertuned.
You want to be a little undertuned and come up.
Yeah.
And then smaller drones than that, like 3 inches and below, what would you bring it down to?
Depends on the power of them. Some of the because there's such variability in that world of 3-inch.
Sure.
3-inch is cine-whoop. From the get-go, they're usually undertuned.
Okay.
Right? But then there's other little light, powerful 3-inch. Yeah, I've seen some of these things. The thing is that area of the hobby hasn't really converged on anything yet. You know what I mean? The 5-inch is like, it is almost a stereotypical type of drone, right? Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we'll do 1.2 and 1.4. Let me just make sure I hit save.
Yep.
We open it.
Do you enjoy this though?
Yeah, this is great. This is great. 49 and 32, we select all. Those were 2 tests in there. We'll import both of them. Once they import, we will erase the flash. while we look at it, so that happens in the background.
Okay, you got
and then we will...
I was looking pretty good.
I did yaw, yeah. I did some yaw too on this one because I figured why not.
Why not? I don't do it, but you know, it's not a bad idea.
Why not? Why not? So then we'll just hit the step response tool so it updates, and then we will do, let's do 5.
All 3 of them. Because,
yeah, all 3.
You'll see a systematic change, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, that's pretty subtle. Okay, so here this is no change in the tuning on the yaw axis. Well, we did change the master multiplier, I guess, but the difference between this line and these lines is me actually going B on the yaw stick. So we actually have data.
We actually have data.
That actually looks fairly good. Like the yaw axis never has as fast of a rise time as the other two because the yaw axis has less authority. It relies on motor torque and not on actual thrust.
That's right.
But this, so you like never see overshoot on the yaw axis in my experience.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty good looking yaw axis.
It's good, yeah. Now you could, in the end, we could still boost it a little bit relative to the other axes.
Sure.
I sometimes do that, but it's not critical. So when you look at these now, you're not going to see much change in the curves because it's the latency differences. I mean, a few milliseconds is meaningful. But when you're on a time scale of 500 milliseconds, you just don't see it.
In.
That's right. You can zoom in. But you can also just come over to those curves and you can see a systematic drop.
Okay, so here I see. So the latency is getting lower.
Yeah.
That's good. And likewise, latency lower.
Absolutely.
That's good.
And now go to the latency drop, then go to set point to gyro delay. I like to look at that one because it's...
Do I need to... Oh, no, it's going to do it.
Yeah. And again, same systematic. So that's
we're getting down to 23, and here's around 26. Yeah,
that's a good indication that's real too. And this is a big jump, right? These are 2 millisecond jumps. Those are
30 to 26 is significant.
So I would probably even try Master 1.6.
Yeah.
I find with a lot of larger rigs, somewhere around that 1.6 is where the fun starts happening.
I don't know if I like the sound of that. Oh, you don't mean fun like we break something.
It starts to feel more locked in around that point. Yeah. At least with lifters, it's a lot like that.
I'm looking close at these lines. I gotta say, I almost feel like they're so close together that we can't really tell much from them.
No, there's no difference. You shouldn't be seeing differences in overshoot. So if you're zoomed in on this and you're seeing subtle differences, you have to remember there's going to be some variability from test to test, right?
So these are... Like we have a little more overshoot, and then the last one, the yellow one, is the highest master multiplier, so it should have more overshoot, but it actually has less.
It actually gets more locked in, definitely, and that's partly what you're seeing here.
Oh.
As you start boosting
because we're not changing the PD balance. The PD balance is the same, and it's getting more locked in. That's right. Yes, okay.
Yeah, you tend to get more reliable results as you get up to that point, too. So I just saw somebody posted, they were tuning like a little tiny whoop, and they had something that was very, very vague, very hard to understand, and all of the tests were like overshooting in the same amount regardless of his damping setting. And the reason for it was because the response was so slow, the master was so low, that there just wasn't very reliable data. As you start boosting the master,
the data gets more
reliable, and the set point and gyro are really tracking one another.
What would be our sign that the master was too high? What's our stop point here where we're like, okay, that's enough?
Couple of things. So one of the things is this latency difference. We call that the delta, the difference between one test to the next. That delta gets less and less.
So if we keep raising master, but it stops dropping and flattens out,
then you're not getting anything from
we sort of reach the physical limit of the system, and then we don't need it to be any higher.
That's right.
But would you say that as long as that delta keeps getting lower, we're good?
Not necessarily.
What would, okay.
Because there's two other things. Are your motors hot? That's one.
Nah.
Okay. The second one would be, are we seeing oscillation?
Okay, so eventually we'll get to a point where we'll get oscillations.
You could.
And the D term...
You could reach the oscillation point before you asymptote, before the delta becomes zero.
At that point, would you go back and adjust the PD balance and raise D some more? Or would you be like, oh no, we're done, we've done it? Because if I have oscillations, then I add D. And then D fixes oscillations.
No, because D doesn't necessarily fix oscillation. The oscillation you're getting then is pure just PID feedback. So at some point when you push the PID, even if everything is balanced, at some point if you push the PID gains too far, it will feed back on itself. It's like a guitar amp. you know, at
Yeah.
some point it will feed back the more you turn up the overall volume, not just the gain, the distortion, say.
Yeah.
As an analogy, you know, I don't know if you play guitar, but
I do. I
yeah.
know what you mean.
But yeah, definitely a PID controller will feed back on itself. It is a feedback loop, right?
Right.
So if the input gets, if the PIDs are pushing too hard, it's going to start to feed back on itself. Yeah.
The iTerm, the I gain, like these lines are just dead on tracking. If we saw these lines being like low, or if we saw them sloping down, then we would think we need more I gain.
Yeah.
In this case, I'm surprised how low the I gain is. Usually the default is much higher than that, especially because this is a bigger, heavier quad. You'd think you would need to move the sliders to the right.
I would still push the iTerm a little bit higher. See, at the end of this tune, you're going to see iTerm is only going to cause you a problem if it accumulates too high. So what you're describing there was problems with iTerm too low.
Right.
So, but when you push iTerm higher, you might start to see some overshoot from that.
Yeah. So if I push markup, we'll see it'll start to look like.
So what you can do is just hit turn off yaw, pitch, and expand, and that puts it all.
Okay, good. So like P term overshoot tends to look, I'm exaggerating, but it tends to look like that.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas excess I gain would look a little bit more like that.
Correct.
It's slower and longer.
That's right.
So would we raise I term or I gain until we started to see that, or and then back it off?
You could, and you and I discussed this, I think, yesterday. So there's two approaches to this. The way I see iTerm is it has a very wide tuning window, and it's very non-linear. It's like nothing overshoot.
Because Betaflight has a lot of ways of adjusting the I gain. It has iTerm wind up.
Right.
It has anti-gravity and so forth, and so iTerm. It's very hard to have too much iTerm that it makes something ridiculously bad. And
with larger rigs, you can though.
Yeah,
absolutely, without a doubt. Like you're right now, if you were to push it back to the 1.0, you may not like it.
Okay.
Right. So, but we're far from that.
Okay.
We're at 0.4, but.
And then we saw that
getting ahead of ourselves too, because we want to finish with the Master Multiplier, because that's going to also keep collapsing the error. And the more we collapse the error, the more room we have to push I. Yeah.
So let's just put iTerm off, or I gain off, and we'll get back to it. Okay, so we're gonna do. So this battery this is one pack.
Yeah.
We just hit 3.5 volts per cell.
Did everything on that one pack.
Although it has taken us like several hours to sit down and just record every little thing that we wanted to record, in practice, like how long, this is one pack, how long would this take you to do if you were just banging it out?
2 packs and about 20 minutes.
Okay.
Really.
The other thing that you just pointed out is that as the battery gets lower, the motors don't push as hard. They're lower RPM.
Yeah.
And so we definitely would want to put a brand new pack on and see if suddenly our PID tune is overtuned.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I don't think you'd be overtuned necessarily. I've rarely seen that issue, but certainly these tests that we're doing now rely on a reliable latency measure.
Right.
And we know latency is pretty affected a lot by the voltage of the battery.
Yeah.
So as we said, a battery, when you plug in a brand new battery, it's at its top voltage, and within about the first 20, 30 seconds, it drops down a volt or so, and then it trickles along for 3-4 minutes or whatever it has, then it falls off the cliff, right? So you want to kind of tune the Master Multiplier in that steady or relatively steady range.
Yeah, so like, especially as we're pushing Master Multiplier higher and higher and higher, like I could imagine a scenario where you're like, oh, I could push the Master Multiplier up and your battery's getting deader and deader.
That's a good point.
And then as soon as you put a new battery on, suddenly your Master Multiplier is higher than you'd like it to be.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe a good piece of advice, he actually said this off camera, maybe a good piece of advice would be that when you start tuning Master Multiplier, you make sure you've got a fresh pack.
Fresh pack for that.
Because the PD balance is going to be the same.
That's right.
But the Master Multiplier is going to depend heavily on the battery.
Yeah, so you know, in a general way, you can almost think of two main steps. There's the PD, the overshoot issue. That's one pack, and the second pack is the Master Multiplier.
All right.
Now, the remaining of this tuning is much easier and doesn't take much time.
So let's do 5, 6, 7. Let's just look at those 4, which is where we're tuning the Master Multiplier. And we see again, big drop in latency.
Yeah.
Big drop in latency.
Totally.
Big drop on all of them.
That's right.
That's we're getting better.
Even considering the fact that you're losing voltage. So that's really telling you something, right? So again,
and we go to the, yep. We'll make sure that that one also is going down.
Yeah. So beautiful, right?
Yeah.
And notice that the difference between
I do see it's starting to level off, isn't it?
It's starting to level off, but the difference between them is shrinking a bit
Oh,
too.
that's true. It's
Like
24, 25,
20.
22, 20. Yeah, they're getting closer.
30, like there's a 4 millisecond difference here,
good.
30 to 26. And as you start to tune it, it's like one starts to asymptote a little faster than the other.
Yeah.
And at some point they start to converge. But
Yeah.
you know, you're looking for a bit of a performance effect here too, because you want to go out there and go, ooh, yeah, this feels great, right?
Right.
In the real world, you might say, well, maybe I don't want to push it that far.
It's even better.
Yeah.
Like we get faster rise time, and it's less overshoot,
That's
and it's a it's like.
There's a bit of noise in it.
It gets noisier. It's more like wiggly.
That's right. It's more wiggly. And remember, I was pointing to that noise floor. That's where that's coming from. If you ever see a lot of that, this is why I see this all the time. People get really noisy step response, and the trouble with it is, it's hard to decipher overshoot.
Right. If there's noise.
From noise. If the noise is as wide and broad and as strong as the overshoot, you can't distinguish one from the other.
Sure.
And so, when you see noise in the step response, that's kind of like jagged like that. That's fairly low frequency noise.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to describe the different types of sort of wavy signals that you could get in a step response, but it gets a bit overcomplicated. But
so I feel like, I mean, I'm not sure I want to push that Master Multiplier any further, especially not without putting a fully charged battery on there.
Totally, yeah. And when you put a fully charged battery, if you were to do this test again, you might even be a little too high, you know.
So maybe we knock it down, or maybe we leave it alone.
I mean, I would say put a pack on. And let's look at it.
Okay.
It's probably good to know what's going to happen. And then.
So we're not going to change anything. We're just going to get a new battery. So wait, why did you start looking at the D term? Because you want to know if we're getting too much noise.
Yeah, so one thing that we didn't do throughout this whole process is always come back to the filters. It was in part because we kind of didn't want to talk too much about filters, but it's always good to keep an eye on what's happening with the spectrum as you're tuning.
Right.
And you get the data for free, it's all there anyway, so you can plug it in now, you know.
The reason for that, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, is that the D term specifically amplifies noise.
That's right.
Right? So the D term, as you raise the Master Multiplier and or as you raise the D term, the D gains, you will be amplifying noise, and that's what makes the hot motors and the flyaway and so forth. And so, you know, we kind of were thinking about that because we were like checking the motors to see if they were hot, but we could go back to this noise graph, and you're specifically looking at the D term noise.
That's right. And you can see here, so this is systematically between your master 1.2 to 1.4 to 1.6, going from red to yellow. And you can see the yellow and the orange.
We're amplifying the noise.
Going up, right?
Right.
And as a general rule of thumb, I tell people that during these wobble tests, you want to try to keep that D-term noise below roughly that -10 point.
Okay, -10.
Everyone likes to have some kind of a cutoff. Where's my target? Where do I stop? It's useful. It's practical in some ways. Now, you don't have to overinterpret this, but I think it's worth maybe filtering the D a little more here.
Okay, so we can see that especially as we get, sorry, let me reset that. So we can see that if we look at the red line, which was Master Multiplier 1.2, it's pretty much below -10. Same on the roll axis. Mostly, but not entire, mostly.
Yeah.
And then for the 1.4 and 1.6, it's definitely going above -10.
That's right.
Now we could back that Master Multiplier down,
Yep.
or we could add more filtering.
Correct.
But the problem with adding filtering is it adds latency. Now, didn't you say earlier that PIDToolBox can show us our filter latency?
Yeah.
Can we look at that?
Yeah, you want to see that?
Yeah.
Let's do it. So over here, you'll see a little drop down called delay.
Okay.
It has multiple things you can look at, but the one we want to look at here is called filter delay. So you're just going to click that, and it's going to plot the delay for the gyro filtering and the delay for the D term. And that's what you see up here.
And we haven't changed our filtering at all, so the delay should be the same for all of them.
Exactly. So you can see that we're getting approximately 1.875 milliseconds on the gyro and 1.75 milliseconds on the D term.
Okay.
And it's very consistent, right? That's really good. So these are pretty reliable. Those are really low for a 7-inch. There's absolutely nothing to worry about there.
You said these are really low for a 7-inch. Why would the acceptable filter delay be related to the prop size?
Yeah, we don't know exactly, or certainly I don't know exactly. But we do know that the larger the drone, it can tolerate more and more filter delay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I believe you. Thousands of drones tuned. And then we turned the camera off and we had a discussion and you explained it to me, and I decided that I didn't want to put it in the video, because I think you only just barely managed to explain it, and I only just barely managed to understand it, and I just feel like we should like have a bit, yeah. So suffice it to say that the bigger the drone, the more filter delay can be tolerated. That's a fact, backed by theory and experiment. Do you have a guideline for like roughly what amount of filter delay you accept based on like what process?
I do. I've had this question asked so many times that I came up with a rough sort of guideline, it's a plot.
Okay.
Can we pull that up?
So this is like grain of salt, but gyro, filter delay, D term, drone size. So we are at a 7-inch. So we would want to shoot for D term delay around 1.5 milliseconds, 1.7 milliseconds. And gyro delay around 2.2, 2.4 milliseconds, something like that.
I say target filter delay. So look, you can, somewhere in that range, you're going to be absolutely fine. So, but I think we could certainly filter the D term a bit more.
Okay, so our D term is going to be 1.7-ish.
Yeah, and that's what we
And we are currently at 1.7. So if we were to add filtering, then we would go past that number.
Yeah, and I don't see a problem with that necessarily, so don't be afraid. That's a rough guideline.
Okay.
I'm lucid with these kinds of things, right?
And then the gyro is below your rough guideline, but am I right that if we add gyro filtering, it will also add D-term filtering because the D-term comes after the gyro?
I don't know. No. I don't think so in general, but I do know one thing, that's another piece of information that's very useful. I've found that if you filter more on the D-term side than the gyro, you'll tend to get better flight performance than if you go the other way around. So and because D is the main culprit of this noise that we're dealing with now, I would err on the side of filtering D-term.
The other thought that I have is that the filter delay is cumulative. So yeah, our goal for D-term is whatever, and our goal for gyro is whatever, but our gyro is actually well below the goal.
Yeah.
And so we may have a little bit more headroom to add D.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go to Betaflight, and we're going to go to PID tuning, and we're going to go to filter settings, and we're going to move the D-term multiplier to the left.
Yeah, I would move it to about a 0.8 or 0.7.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's no way to know what that delay is until we do the test flight.
We'll see it, yeah.
So the newer battery got the latency down a little bit. Yeah. And then Yaw didn't change really at all.
But not a lot, so that's very...
We don't see,
That feels good, right? And nothing is changing in terms of the step response, so yay.
We're basically the same. So the battery voltage is not
you're
affected.
Okay, even if you went to that,
Okay.
So close that, and let's go to the...
We'll go to...
Spectral Analyzer.
Spectral Analyzer. And then D-term?
D-term, yeah.
Or D-term pre-filled?
No, just D-term. I never look at pre-filtered D-term. Okay. So just scroll down then, because you got a lot of tests.
I got you, to the bottom.
You want the last two.
Last two.
And then reset and run.
Reset and run.
Okay, actually we want delay too.
Which one? Filter delay.
Filter delay. By the way, let me just show you a little trick. Yeah. So when you do have something that you commonly see, that you like to use, you could hit save settings. I won't do it right now because it'll also save the D term as the default, right? Yeah. But when you find something that you like, if you want filter delay to be there all the time,
I see.
And you just hit the save settings and it'll remember.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay, so there you go.
Filter delay went up to from 1.175 to 2 milliseconds. Did it get better?
No change on gyro. This is important because
we didn't change gyro.
That it's reliable. It's a reliable measure too, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, are we below -10?
Well, you're definitely lower here, so the low pass is going to have the strongest effect here, and so I still see it as a net good, but you're right. It's still a bit.
We're still above minus 10 here. How would you approach this? Would you add more filtering, or would you just say this is okay?
I think it's okay. I think it's okay.
Would we back the master multiplier down a tick?
You could do that as well. You could do that as well.
So this, I think we're in the range of like, there's not a right answer. It's like, how good do you want your quad to fly versus you have a little bit more noise, which is maybe going to add a little bit more, like not jello exactly, but
it might not do anything. It might even make things better. So.
And then maybe a little bit more likelihood that if you bent a prop, you might smoke a motor or have a flyaway.
Right.
So it's just like, how comfortable are you pushing that limit?
That's right.
Okay. Let's call that good. We could go back and forth on that.
Yeah.
Our filters are pretty dialed in. Our PID master multiplier pretty dialed in. Where to now?
Pictures dialed in. So we've only got a couple things left, right?
Oh my God.
So the next thing is what I would traditionally do here is I would just set the iTerm at a point that I know is going to work because it has such a wide tuning window.
Like 1.0.
You could try 1.0. I get the feeling that with the rig that still has a significant amount of inertia, I think you'll start to see some overshoot. Okay. Do you want to try that anyway? Because if you go to 1.0 now,
yeah. I mean, if it's good, let's say what let's do.
Overshoot,
let's go to 1.2 and let's see if we can get some overshoot out of it. Like, let's see if we can make it misbehave. We're going to do iTerm 1.2.
Or did you want to systematically like 0.6?
No, I'm going to just do 1.2.
Okay.
Oh, you know, that makes sense. Now, you're right. 0.06. Let's do
6, 8, 1, 1, 2.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, okay. That's scientific.
Or should we, okay, hang on, back up a bit. You're not going to see much difference in small steps of I. Like, as I said, I is very nonlinear, and it's
so we went from 0.4 to 0.6.
I would say let's go 0.5, 1.0, 1.5.
Okay.
Big changes.
Done.
0.5.
0.5 is practically the same as 0.4.
That's right.
What if we just did 1.0 and 1.5?
Okay, let's do that.
Yeah. All right. Great. We'll set it at 1.0.
Definitely I. So there's the I. You can see 51, 127. I can't see that yellow sucks. It's close to 200.
Look, we increased the latency a little bit. The latency went up as we raised the iTerm. Isn't that weird?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if that's significant, but definitely it's yeah. Okay.
And then what let's do is...
But here's the point.
Yeah.
You don't have a problem with iTerm. Just put it back at 1.0, and I think you're good.
Yeah.
I mean, you could go 1.5, but I don't think I would buy.
I don't see really any appreciable difference between these.
No.
They're identical. And that's what we... Frankly, you predicted this would happen because Betaflight manages the iTerm so well. And the iTerm is relatively slow moving, and it's like you kind of just put that slider wherever you want. I will say, and I know you're going to hate this, I think that I can feel a difference sometimes between really low and really high I gain. I know if it doesn't manifest in the step response, it shouldn't
I totally
be.
agree with you. No, that's not true because the thing is, a wobble test is not really taxing the iTerm like you would get in a real world. So when you're out like racers, for example, carving corners and stuff, there's no way to sort of quantify that in the step response.
So should we be doing that kind of flying then to get the iTerm dialed in?
Yeah, but you're not. I mean, you can't really analyze the step response.
The problem is that's not repeatable.
It's not
exactly.
Repeatable, and
yeah.
it may not produce a useful step response.
So the takeaway,
it's more consistent, right? Like you're not getting sharp inputs. You're getting a constant sort of.
Yeah.
Right. Like
should I take off and do? Well, no. If I took off and I did flips and rolls, the exact situation where iTerm windup would be an issue, Betaflight has iTerm relax to fix that.
Yeah, it's a possibility that if you were to do really, really high rate flips and rolls, like I mean, I wouldn't ask 1,000 degrees per second out of a drone like that, but if you did, you might start to see this overshoot a little bit.
Okay, so how do you?
It's one of those. It's one of the more nonlinear terms.
So if the iTerm isn't well reflected in the wobble test, and we can
it's not that it's not reflected. Remember, without it, the thing falls
No, that's what I was going to say. If it was too low, that fell apart. We reached a minimum.
Right.
We found the minimum. At that point, then, how do I know when I've got it right? Now, what I've done in the past is, when I is really low, the quad kind of feels loose. As I sling it into a turn, it kind of slides in. Yes. And then as you raise I, it feels stiff.
Yeah.
Like almost like it doesn't want to go into the turn, but it tracks really well.
Yeah.
And I've just tuned I in the past based on feel, but it's not kind of where we want to be with like a objective per tuning.
Well, you know, and even though you're not seeing overshoot here, as you get bigger and bigger than this is fairly big, but like I'm working with like 10, 15, 20-inch rigs, you will see it.
Okay.
I'm really surprised we didn't see it here, but again, you know, it's a fairly powerful, relatively light 7-inch.
Yeah.
And now whether you want to use iTerm at 1.0 or 1.5, I think I'm going to leave that up to you. But honestly,
I'm just going to
try it for feel. Like bring it out.
1.0, just because I feel like if it's too low, I don't want a 7-inch cruiser to feel like loose. It's not a racing drone. And I'm going to leave it at 1 because 1's right in the middle, and like, you know, why not?
You can't go wrong with that. If you're not getting any overshoot, 1 will work across the board, right? But if you are, then you'll want to bring that down.
And then if, as I'm flying it, I'm going like, oh, it feels really stiff, then maybe if I want to loosen it up, I'll drop it down. And I know that 0.4 is the minimum where those step response graphs really settle down.
That's right. That's right. And I should say something too. You know, even though I love doing all this data analysis, at the end of it, I'm in the field. I'm often tweaking things in the field. I'm that kind of person. So that's where I started. Was feel was still important to me.
The difference is that now we have a objective baseline.
Yeah.
For the and we also have some idea of like I know I probably wouldn't want to push my master multiplier any higher because my D-term noise is going to start to. So like I probably wouldn't tweak that, right?
Yeah,
anyway.
Yeah, and maybe you'd even drop it a bit. So again, there's some variability here in exactly how far you want to push those things, but it's still guiding you right to some point, and then you have some freedom then to play around in that space, right? I don't see a problem with that.
So I is done.
I's done.
What
so
about,
there's 2 left.
Yeah.
So we have stick response, feed forward, and dynamic damping.
Dmax. Where do we go from here?
So let's talk about the stick response, feed forward.
Okay.
So again, refer to your video, right?
Yeah. In short, the stick response, feed forward is really fascinating to me because the idea is that we know that there will always be a delay from the moment that you move the stick, the gyro reads out, the PID controller says, oh, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Quick, start moving the quad. And then there's a delay as the quad begins to move. Since we know that delay is always going to be there, basically as soon as the PID controller sees the stick move, it starts pushing the quad in that direction without waiting for the error to accrue.
So, you know, I'm going to give you a little bit of a what I would expect from the effect of pushing this gain factor. So if you recall, our latency was roughly 20 milliseconds on roll and about 22 milliseconds on pitch. If you come back to your feed forward, what it's going to do is if you push this up to 0.5, it's going to drop that latency by roughly 6 milliseconds. How do I know that? A lot of testing.
Okay.
It'll subtract about 6 milliseconds. If you go to 1.0, it'll subtract about 12 milliseconds.
I like that.
Yeah, so if you go higher, it'll subtract more. But it will start to disrupt the tune a little bit because feed forward, unlike the other terms, is, I said, blind to PID error.
Right.
In other words, like you said, it just gets ahead of the game, pushes the motors and starts to get the quad rolling, but it doesn't really know how much error it's changing.
Right.
And what that means is if it pushes too far, too fast, P has to go, oh, what the heck is going on? I'm going to have to slow him down.
But by the time
you could overshoot,
by the time the PID controller realizes that there's error, feed forward has already shoved the quad.
That's right.
And so instead of the error being simply that the stick has moved and the quad hasn't started moving yet, now we've got some error because the feed forward's like getting in our way.
Yeah.
So too much feed forward gets in the way of the PID controller.
It could, yeah. Now with a rig like this, I don't think you have to worry too much about that.
Because it's so big and heavy.
Yeah, right. But with a 5-inch, you're going to almost get down to 0 delay between set point and gyro when you set that feed forward back at 1. You're going to get close to 0. And if you go a little farther, you will get to 0 or even minus numbers. Now,
what's the sign? Minus numbers. How do you?
Yeah. How do you get that? So essentially minus numbers, the
quad will start leading the stick.
Yeah, because you're essentially creating overshoot along the trajectory.
Oh wow!
You know? Yeah.
You don't want that.
No, because then the P starts pushing in the other direction. Now, some people actually use the P term as the gauge to how far to push feed forward. So what they do is, so if you look at the, let's go back to the trace, because this might be interesting to you.
Yeah.
If you look at a given trace, let me just plot P term.
Okay.
So, and I'm going to just zoom in on one of these.
Okay.
This one looks pretty good. So you'll notice that here you're rolling right? So that's red is your stick input. You're saying you're commanding a rightward movement. Then you're saying go left, and then you're going back right. So when you're pushing rightward, P pushes into that move, right? So that green curve, P term, is pushing the drone to track there, right? What happens when you crank up feed forward is P doesn't have to work as hard.
Right.
And if you crank it high enough, P actually becomes 0.
Okay.
During those moves.
Because feed forward is doing all the work.
It's doing the work during the
And then eventually feed forward pushes you too far and P opposes it. You don't want that.
I don't think you do. Now,
it seems bad.
P is then acting a little bit like the way D term acts.
No, P needs to be P.
Yeah.
So basically raise feed forward until delay gets to 0 or until you see the P opposing feed forward. P going
that's
negative.
The approach that people use on a 5-inch. Would I do that on a larger drone?
Because it'll never get to that point.
No, not just that.
Oh.
Is that you got a lot of mass there. You're going to be commanding. You're going to be requesting a lot from those motors.
Oh, you'll overwork the motors.
You're asking the motors to accelerate really fast.
Got you.
So my concern, especially with larger rigs, is desync behavior.
Oh.
So
because these big motors just can't accelerate that fast.
Yeah, and you know, but.
So would you say raise feed forward until we start to see that latency flatten out, perhaps?
Which latency is that?
Well, over in the step response.
Oh, well, no, because you can't really run the step response. It won't really give you an accurate measure of the latency. So when I start looking at feed forward...
Why does step response not work right when you add feed forward?
Let's do a test and let's take a look at it. I'll show you.
So here's what we're going to do.
Let's do feed forward 0.5, feed forward 1.0, and maybe 1.5 or something.
Love it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, these motors are way hotter.
Oh shit, yeah.
Yeah, oh no.
Yeah, let's not go beyond.
No, wait. No, I don't smell it.
Okay.
No, that's too hot. Okay, stop, do not proceed. Let's just real quick say, what makes motors hot? What makes them hot is when the ESC tries to make the motor move in a way the motor can't move. The analogy I like to use is that if I am gonna, if I wanna push on something and it rolls or slides with my hand, I get no friction. But if I push on something and it doesn't move, I get friction and I get heat. And when the ESC is saying to the motor, speed up, slow down, speed up, slow down, speed up, slow down, and the motor simply cannot do that because it is a physical object with mass and inertia, that converts into heat. And so the feed forward can make motors hot because you're doing so many ridiculously jerky stick movements.
It's partly me, but again, it's because also that acceleration, that commanded acceleration coming out of the motor signals, the ESCs is much steeper and sharper. And
so we do not need to go any further.
No.
Okay. Oh, we're okay. I think we would have potentially hurt something.
You could also mitigate that a bit with a slightly better smooth. So like you chose the freestyle. If you went with
it's too hot.
If you went with not the cinematic, but the next one down, it would probably smooth out those edges.
You know, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Over in the presets, I selected, I'm not going to change this, but I selected the freestyle preset just because out of habit, but especially for a 7-inch cinematic drone, I might have selected cinematic, and then we would have tolerated more feed forward, because one of the things that does is it smooths the RC command. And
now you don't get the same benefits of feed forward because you've got some delay on it. You're smoothing it out and out, but it's still going to be good, right? For sure.
Save flash to file.
Yeah, well, actually, I'd like to look at the raw data. Okay. So often what I do with analyzing the feed forward is look at the raw data, because I think this is going to be really eye-opening. So if you zoom in on one of these moves, let's just take a glance at that, just to get a sense on the delay, the distance between the set point and gyro, okay? Now let's come back and take a look at feed forward 0.5 and see what's going on there. Now, obviously, I couldn't make as big a moves here. It's a little...
Because it's
tricky.
in acro.
Yeah, it's in acro. But if you zoom in on any of this, you're going to see.
Oh, they're visibly closer.
Visibly closer. Now things are changing though, right? You can see little bits of overshoot. See that?
Oh, I do
now,
see.
Yeah, now let's go to 1.0.
But the overshoot is, hang on, go back.
Okay, yeah. I'm always in too much of a rush, right? Yeah, so let's just zoom in on that again and see that.
Little bits of overshoot. The overshoot is where the black line gets bigger than the red line. The red line is the set point, and we should see the black line mirroring it, slightly delayed, but instead it's overshooting.
Yeah.
And we weren't seeing that before.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then if we go to feed forward 1.0, and look at that one, you're going to see these are much closer again, right? So
and we see more overshoot, probably, right?
Probably. So you can see the lines are closer, and again, you can see
the lines are much closer, though.
Yeah,
so maybe that's acceptable.
Yeah.
We have more overshoot, but we have
exactly.
We have a little more, like that overshoot is potentially imperceptible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's not bad, right? Okay. Now we can measure that delay. So we could go into step response, but it doesn't. It's going to look a bit wonky. Let's just take a look.
I want to see it.
Let's do it.
Show me the step response for those last.
Let's go with three of them so that we can see.
Feed forward 0, 0.5, and 1.0.
Exactly.
Oh, we got a lot of overshoot.
So in fact, it doesn't look that bad here. I've seen cases where this gets ridiculous. So it's because, so I should qualify this. You know, I've often said don't look at the step response when you're using overshoot.
Or using feed forward.
Really, or when using feed forward. And really, the problem arises with the really high rates. It's the 500 hertz ELRS where that it gets really funny. And I don't know exactly what's behind it, but once you go lower, this actually is approximately what we see in the real data. It looks pretty close, right?
Yeah. Oh, you're saying that at high packet rates, the step response graph calculates incorrectly and just looks like garbage.
What's happening in the real data. So you look in the real data, you won't see overshoot, but you look in the step response and you get this massive overshoot. So something weird's going on there with those high packet rates.
Yeah. And we've got some overshoot, but like
look at the latency drop off here.
Yeah, but the latency is way lower.
20 down to 14 down to 12.
It's very, by the way, 20 down to 14. What's 20 minus 14, please?
Oh,
what's what's 20 minus 14?
It's not 6, and that's because it's not the right test. So
oh, damn it. I was about to prove you right.
Set point gyro. This is the one that's going to prove me right.
Okay, do I need to hit reset?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, 22 down to
15.
15.
7.
That's damn close.
Not bad.
Here's what I see. I see that at feed forward 1.0, number one, we had hot motors. Like that's just not acceptable. Although you might say, well, I'm only going to do smooth cinematic flying. I'm not going to do rapid stick movements like that, so I could get away with it. But at that point, what do you care about feed forward?
Well, why do you have feed forward on?
Yeah.
If you're not moving the sticks, you don't need feed forward.
But I see that at feed forward 1.0, we got a massive overshoot.
Yeah.
And not much improvement in latency.
That's true.
Whereas we got a big improvement in latency going to 0.5 and not much overshoot. I think it's very clear where the sweet spot is here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now roll got a little bit weird, and maybe this is what you're talking about, but if I zoom here on roll, hang on.
That's pitch, you mean, yeah.
Pitch, sorry, that's right. Pitch, like we go, what is that? What is that? Is that the feed forward weirdness you're talking about?
But not really, no. Really the high packet rates will tend to produce overshoot that's very high. But I don't think it's unreasonable to actually use this analysis right here. It actually mirrors pretty much what we see in the data. Okay. But I just, it's something that to avoid the
oh, feed forward is at 1.5? Oh, no, I went to change it. We never flew it.
No, that's right.
So we'll take it back down to at least 1.0 and probably more like 0.5.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Yeah. I often go somewhere between 0.5 and 1.0 just by default, Yeah,
I don't want
But I think you're in good shape there now. I think that's pretty good.
Is there anything else you would look at with feed forward?
No, I'd come back now and take a look at our sliders and do a last thought about what you want to do with the rest of the things here. So we've pretty much got all the sliders where I think you're happy with them, right?
Yep.
So the only two things left is, well, the main thing is dynamic damping.
Dmax.
And then maybe we can talk about whether we want to boost yaw or not. But if you look at dynamic damping, so what is dynamic damping, first of all?
Dynamic damping is that when I deflect the stick, it's actually velocity of stick, right? Is it not stick position, but it's velocity?
It's stick acceleration. That's
okay, acceleration. Okay.
Well, not stick velocity, which is drone acceleration.
Right. So when I am moving the stick, the faster I'm moving the stick, the higher the D gain gets boosted. The idea being that those are the times when the drone is trying to accelerate and D is needed the most.
Yeah, and it's pretty transient. Like it's not like it's gonna stay up there.
No.
So as you snap the stick, it goes up and comes back down, right? So and it'll bump up to that Dmax. Now, it's actually Dmax is actually 0. So if I set this higher now, say back at 1, the Dmax value is higher than your regular D. So what that means is, as we just said, when you jam the stick, you're going to momentarily bump up to near that Dmax and come back down.
So now, if the slider is all the way to the left and Dmax is lower than D, it's just not doing anything.
Dmax is never lower, so Dmax
starts at D. Okay,
that's
got
right,
it. Got it.
So here it's just saying you have 1 D term. As you increase this, you have 2. Now the probability that you get to Dmax is actually pretty hard, and you can change that easiness with which it actually goes up there with this gain factor. So if you crank that gain factor up higher, it means just small movements will jump me up to that high value. Now why would you want to do that? So one scenario that I've often suggested to people is maybe, so now that we've done our tests, we know that we need 67 on roll, and we need D106 on pitch to adequately arrest that overshoot. What you could do is keep those numbers in mind, 67, 106, and we could do something like this. Right?
Oh, so and that it's
and
lower.
Then you put this up until you get your 67.
I see. No, that makes total sense. Right, because when we're doing the wobble test, we're doing jerky stick movements. That's our Dmax.
Right. So now here's our 67, 107, 68, 109. Close as we can get it with the slider. So but we won't get those unless we do full stick deflection. While you're cruising around, you'll get this D.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's a use case. It's a way of keeping the D
What's
lower.
the D? What percent would you set it to of Dmax?
Well, the question is whether you want to do that at all.
Well, the idea there is that you're going to get cooler motors, because during the time when you're just cruising and not making big stick movements, D will be dropped. You'll get less high frequency noise. Also, I could probably make an argument that you'll get like smoother footage because there's less noise in your motor signal.
Maybe. Or you might get worse prop wash performance, stuff like that. That's something to keep in mind. You're not gonna benefit your prop wash performance with less D. So actually, forward flight smoothness won't typically get better.
So one argument is you just say Betaflight devs Dmax was an evolutionary dead end and just leave Dmax at 0.
No, I think it has its use case, and especially for drones where like we could easily dampen at 1.4. I've seen rigs that you got to push that up to 1.8 and it's still not damping well. In those cases, you're like, wow, well, what are we going to do here? We're going to just keep pushing D until the whole thing just catches fire. So what you do in that case is really make use of that dynamic damping. It's really valuable in those cases, right? So it just jumps up there when you need it if you make those big, hard, aggressive moves on a larger rig. So, so that's one scenario.
How would you tune this one?
Personally, I would just leave it off because I think it tunes so nice with that. And I think like you're gonna experience the effect of this D even at the smaller moves as well. I think it'll feel more.
I think the idea is that Dmax adds complexity to solve a problem, but if you're not having that problem, you don't need it.
Yeah, that's one way to think about it.
In our case, if we have cool motors, if we have good prop wash performance, and if we're able to fly as aggressively as we want to fly without hot motors, then we just leave it. But if we got into a situation where we had to crank D to such extreme situations that as soon as we started flying aggressively or we started getting hot motors, we might do better than have Dmax and then lower D, and that gives the D term some time to like cool off. But potentially at the expense of response.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So there you are. So you could potentially boost Yaw if you wanted to.
I don't want to.
If you think it's good,
I don't want to do that because I've been in situations in the past where you're cranking yaw P gain to the moon and the motors just don't have the responsiveness to do it. And fundamentally, like, you're not doing radical yaw moves.
That's right.
Where I need sharp stops. You're not going to get sharp stops.
You also have, if you really crank the P and the I on yaw, when you do make aggressive yaw moves, you
gain a shitload of altitude. Yeah, so like I would probably just leave that.
Yeah, sure.
If you wanted to do that, you would do wobble tests with just yaw.
Yeah.
And then you would try to get the latency down. But then you would want to do other types of flying, including sharp yaw moves, and see, like, if you do a yaw spin, does it just climb to the moon? Like,
there's a reason why Betaflight didn't make a yaw slider.
Yeah.
They're almost saying, look, it's going to be okay. Yeah.
Have we finished PID tuning this?
Yeah.
Well, so here's what we're going to do to close out the video. I'm going to do one flight on the original Betaflight PIDs. And so we're going to go into the PID tuning tab. Let's just hit save just to make sure. We're going to go to PID profile 2, which is the default Betaflight PIDs. We're going to fly it. I'm going to have a GoPro. I'm going to rip it. I'm just going to rip it. We're going to see what happens. And then we're going to do one on Brian's PID tune. And we're going to rip it. We're going to see which you think is better.
You got a new pack?
Yes, it's downstairs. All right. So we're going to start with Betaflight default PIDs. Little wiggle there. I don't think these rates are going to be high enough to really get any bounce back or anything on flips and rolls. Jerk it around, little acro bullshit. Off throttle, and little bit of wobbles there in zero throttle. Little bit of like slow wobbles I can see. Anything you can think of for me to do?
Have fun.
Let's try prop wash. Not bad, honestly. I think my up tilt has changed. Yeah. I think the gimbal has moved. All right, so I'm gonna bring it in at the very least and adjust. It sounds really good. Betaflight default PIDs are, I know they're tuned for 5-inch, but.
Yeah. So, you know, we got the Master at 1.62, so let's keep in mind whether we could be overtuned, right? You'll really know when you push it now. So I hope we're not. Hope we're not. There's no oscillation, so I'm not worried about that. But let's see. I mean, I want to know. Like, that's a dramatic change, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, I feel like this is kind of make or break for you. Oh, I see the GoPro moved. That's interesting. I feel like this is kind of make or break for you. Like, if it's a piece of shit, then what are you gonna do? Like, we're just gonna, well, Brian White.
Then nobody's gonna see this video.
Oh,
I forgot to get you to sign that NDA.
PID profile 1, yeah. You gotta believe, Brian.
Gotta believe. But the fact that was flying pretty decent on defaults, like, and we're a long way from that.
We're gonna be overtuned and it's gonna be fucked up?
I think we're gonna be okay.
Okay.
But nonetheless, I think it's if you don't feel a difference, then you have no sensation.
It speaks to the power of Betaflight's default tune is pretty robust. It speaks to the
power of Betaflight in general. That's right.
I'm not allowed to say good things about Betaflight. You have to say good
Remember,
things
though,
only
we did
about
change the filters a bit too. That's going to facilitate.
Here we go. So we're not worried, but aware of the possibility that it's overtuned. No issues there, no oscillations. That feels better. That's better. I think that slow wobble is gone. Yeah, no, the slow wobble is gone on zero throttle. And I think that's pretty good prop wash performance for a 7-inch, don't you think?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think that roll felt a little bit lazier. Oh, yeah. You can really snap it. Oh, interesting. Okay. I mean, that's pretty good. 369. Oh, that makes me want to rip. I don't want to hit ourselves standing under this tree, but...
Yeah, don't do that.
Holy shit, okay. Smooth as fuck, smooth as fuck.
Now pitch is really cranked up there compared to before. You must feel something different on pitch.
I don't know, you can put it back and try again. Let me put it back and try again. I might just be getting warmed up.
Yeah.
Let me put it back, hold on.
Yeah, you're definitely more aggressive then.
Well, that's because the tune makes me feel more confident.
Okay.
I would, perhaps. Let me go put it back on PID profile 2. Save and exit. Okay, and rolling. This is back on the original.
See, it actually sounds a bit quieter though. So it sounds like, you know? So
No, you see that wub 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 there?
Yep.
Oh God, what a mess. You should see it.
Okay.
Oh no, that's the biggest explanation. Oh yeah, no. It feel, you know, sloppy, sloppy, sloppy. Oh no, see it shake there?
Well, from
No,
my perspective, I don't see anything, just so you know.
Okay, you can't see it, okay. We'll look at, no. Uh-huh. Let me try that, I think that wobble is subtle, but
Yeah.
I think it's, I can tell you which one I'd rather fly for sure.
I'm thinking the stick feel has gotta be
Yeah,
different though,
for
for
sure.
sure. Yeah.
Like so during the hard aggressive turns, there's an absolute difference in our pit tune being better and smoother.
Yeah.
It is kind of like shaking
Yeah.
and falling out, not dramatically,
Yeah,
but a
yeah.
little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas with our pit tune, it was just locked in.
Yeah.
The stick feel is definitely better.
Yeah.
I-
Pitch is a hard thing to sense the difference, but
I think if you were profile, I'm gonna go back to.
Too,
pit
remember we
profile
were
1.
saying earlier too, you still might consider like bringing the master down a little bit.
Yeah,
You could be injecting a little more noise into the PID controller than you
Yeah.
need as well, right? It's still it's a dramatically different tune. The numbers are not subtly different, right? So, yeah.
You could certainly argue that this 7-inch is not meant to fly like this.
Yeah.
And so I'm asking too much of it, and under the normal way you would fly this, you might not notice much of this. But like, imagine you're doing some kind of a cinematic thing and you whip around, like you're chasing a drift car and you whip around and it's smooth versus falling out.
Yeah.
It is way better. Oh, golly. Yeah, no, that's way better. That's way better. Yeah. And let's check the motors real quick.
Yep.
Bring it in. Check the motors. Don't give them time to cool down. Are they cool? Are they warm? Are they hot? Are they spicy?
They're not bad. They actually tend to heat up a little more when you wait a second because you stop the airflow now. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been working, but they're not bad.
Oh, yeah. No, that's not bad at all.
Brian,
That's good. There you go.
that's a good pit tune. Holy shit, dude.
There you go. That was the process.
Well, my first time, it took me
20 minutes.
about 7 hours. Have we been at this since like 10:30? It's now like 5:30.
Well, it was lunch and
And we had some lunch in the middle. Say 6 hours. You'll get it down to 20 minutes.
Yeah, it can be done.
And hopefully you guys enjoyed the process. Thank you, Brian, for coming. Brian drove all the way down from Canada, Ontario, Canada to Knoxville, Tennessee. Told him he didn't have to. And check out PIDToolBox, Brian's Patreon and his software. Anything else you got to plug? You certainly earned it.
I'm happy, and I'm just glad to have met you in person, and it's been a fantastic day.
Same. And now I know all your secrets, And I don't know what else, no. I'm sure there's more content that we could make about PID tuning. I'm sure there's a lot we didn't get into.
Yeah.
But I think this is a great way to start kicking it off. Awesome.
Great day.
Hey, if you guys want to check out my video about PID, feedforward, what is a PID controller, and see this cool app that I made, I'm a programmer too, with Claude.
Oh, for sure.
A cool app that I made to simulate a PID controller and how you can see the effect of changes you make in your PIDs and step response graph. I've got a video about that, how to use it, what they do. I'll put a card on screen and a link in the video description below. Brian, do you have a video you want to plug and a card on screen? What video should, if they want to get into your content, what should they? I
mean, the latest video I did last summer or whatever, it basically runs through this process as well, but it's much shorter than what you and I just did. So I think this is the video. I don't do a lot of videos, to be honest. That's why I'm here.
Well, screw Brian's YouTube channel. He has one. I'll put a link to his YouTube channel, and that's it. We're out.